Good morning. Good morning, all. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to receive testimony on the Department of Defense's fiscal year 2017 budget request, the associated future years defense program, and the posture of U.S. Armed Forces. We welcome our witnesses. We thank each of you for your service to our nation and to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines serving here at home and around the world. Before I proceed with my statement, let me just say that yesterday, disturbing statements made by a senior executive of the United Launch Alliance were reported in the media. These statements raised troubling questions about the nature of the relationship between the Department of Defense and ULA. This committee treats with the utmost seriousness any implication that the department showed favoritism to a major defense contractor or that efforts have been made to silence members of Congress. Mr. Secretary, I expect that you will make a full investigation into these statements and take action wherever appropriate. Last month, the Director of National Intelligence provided this committee a candid and unsettling picture of our worldwide threats. Just consider what has occurred over the past 5 years. While al-Qaeda remains a real and potent threat, the vanguard of global terrorism is increasingly led by ISIL, which has metastasized across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, and which has already launched attacks into the heart of Europe and inspired an attack here in the United States. Russia has invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea, menaced our NATO allies, intervened militarily in Syria, and is now regarded by Chairman Dunford and many of our military leaders say as our nation's greatest threat. China has continued its rapid military modernization, steadily militarized the South China Sea, and used coercion and the threat of force to bully our Asian allies and partners. North Korea has launched brazen cyber attacks against the United States, continued to advance and test its nuclear weapons program, and conducted provocative missile tests, including a potential ICBM capability. Rather than moderating its malign activities in the Middle East, as advocates of the nuclear agreement predicted, Iran has instead increased its support for its terrorist proxies from Syria to Yemen, conducted advanced missile tests in violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and fired rockets near a U.S. aircraft carrier. More recently, Iran seized 2 U.S. Navy vessels, detained 10 U.S. sailors, and propagandized the entire incident in total violation of international law and centuries of maritime tradition. These are the growing threats we face in the world, and yet the Department of Defense remains guided by a strategy that predates all of these developments. It is based on assumptions about the world that no longer apply. What's worse, the same is true about our nation's defense spending. While the requirements for our military have grown, the Budget Control Act arbitrarily capped defense spending back in 2011. Despite periodic relief from these caps, each of our military services remain undersized, unready, and underfunded to meet the current and future threats. This translates into real things that our military, as remarkable and determined as it is, simply cannot do for our nation. Our aircraft carriers no longer provide constant presence in the Middle East or the Western Pacific. Just 1/3 of Army brigade combat teams are ready to deploy and operate decisively. The Air Force is the smallest it's ever been, and more than half of its squadrons are not combat mission ready. Marine Corps Aviation is in crisis, and the Assistant Commandant testified this week that his forces cannot execute our nation's defense strategy. The effects on the present force are bad enough. The effects on the future force are worse. Years and years of deferred maintenance and delayed modernization are creating a mountain of bills that will soon come due. From 2018 to 2021 alone, the Department of Defense needs $100 billion above the BCA caps just to meet current requirements. In reality, those requirements are inadequate. Additional resources will be needed, and the longer we try to delay that bill, the bigger and worse it gets, and the more we run the risk of return to sequestration. This is a crisis of our own making, and I'm speaking of the Congress as well. And it is why many of us are so concerned about the President's budget request for fiscal year 2017. There's a lot to like about this request. Many of the investments, especially related to the so-called third offset strategy, are critical and long overdue. That said, though our nation is asking our military to do more over the next fiscal year, the President's defense budget request in real dollars is actually less than it is this year. As a result, the Department was forced to cut $17 billion it said it needed last year purely for budget reasons. To be sure, the temporary effects of more positive economic assumptions and lower fuel prices softened the blow. Nevertheless, the Department cut over $10 billion in real military capability to mitigate this shortfall. Nothing in the Bipartisan Budget Act prevented the President from requesting more than he did. He did not have to fund our growing operational requirements by cutting modernization and procurement. He chose to do so. And these are just some of the consequences. The Army had to cut 24 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. The Air Force had to cut 5 F-35As this year and 45 over the next 4 years. The Navy plans to lay up an additional 5 Ticonderoga-class cruisers. The Marine Corps cut 77 Joint Light Tactical Vehicles, $1.3 billion in military construction, and family housing has been cut. And certain critical nuclear modernization efforts, including an ICBM replacement and the B-61 nuclear bomb tail kit, have been further delayed. The unfunded requirements of the military services now total nearly $18 billion. That represents the additional ships, airplanes, helicopters, fighting vehicles, training, and other programs that our military leaders say they need simply to carry out our increasingly antiquated defense strategy at an acceptable level of risk. Last year, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dempsey, described the future year's defense plan as, quote, the lower ragged edge of manageable risk in our ability to execute the defense strategy. And now here we are 1 year later and $17 billion less than what our military needed and planned for. I do not know what lies beneath the, quote, lower ragged edge of manageable risk, but this is what I fear it means, that our military is becoming less and less able to deter conflict, and if God forbid deterrence does fail somewhere and we end up in conflict, our nation will deploy young Americans into battle without sufficient training or equipment to fight a war that will take longer, be larger, cost more, and ultimately claim more American lives than it otherwise would have. This is the growing risk we face, and we can't change course soon enough. We should not threaten the stability provided by the Bipartisan Budget Act. We should build on it, and therefore, we make a virtue out of stability. Let's recall, this budget agreement ends this year, and defense spending over the next 4 years is capped by a law at $100 billion less than what our witnesses will testify our military needs. That kind of stability is not the answer. It is the problem. And if we cut into our military muscle again this year, our looming budget problems just get worse. Finally, another priority of this committee will remain the defense reform effort that we began last year, including a review of the Goldwater-Nichols legislation that is now marking its 30th anniversary. Over the past year, Senator Reid and his staff and I and on my staff, we've held hearings and conducted interviews with dozens of former and currently serving military and civilian defense leaders, including discussions with our distinguished witness today. The result is that I believe we have a rather clear definition of the challenge that we all must address. The focus of Goldwater-Nichols was operational effectiveness, improving our military's ability to fight as a joint force. The challenge today is strategic integration. By that I mean improving the ability of the Department of Defense to develop strategies and integrate military power globally to confront a series of threats, both states and non-state actors, all of which span multiple regions of the world and numerous military functions. Put simply, our competitors are catching up, and our defense organization must be far more agile and innovative than it is. As the committee considers what steps may be necessary to improve our defense organization, we are committed to work closely with both of you and we would welcome any thoughts and recommendations you are prepared to share today. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming our witnesses and thanking them for their service. The President's FY 2017 budget's mission for the Department of Defense includes nearly $583 billion in discretionary spending and complies with the funding levels included in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015. Of this amount, $523.9 billion is included in the base budget, and $58.8 billion is designated for the Overseas Contingency Operations account. As the committee considers the Department's funding request, we must always be mindful of the risks facing our country and our national security challenges. Russia's increasingly aggressive posture in Eastern Europe and the Middle East must be monitored, contained, and when necessary, countered. China continues to invest aggressively in its military, particularly in capabilities that allow them to project power and deny access to others. North Korea recently conducted a rocket launch in violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions and continues to be an immediate and present danger to global security. Finally, Iran is a significant concern to the committee, particularly its recent missile tests and ongoing support to non-state actors across the Middle East. Our nation's counterterrorism fight continues to be a top priority. It has been a year of significant security and political transition in Afghanistan, and we must continue to evaluate how we can best enable efforts by the government of Afghanistan to protect and govern its people. In Iraq, ISIL has now lost significant territory, but difficult tasks remain, including evicting ISIL from population centers. Furthermore, the dangers posed by the disrepair of the Mosul Dam must be addressed. In Syria, ISIL maintains control of many areas while the world evaluates what Russia's recent announcement of withdrawal means for negotiations. And as ISIL loses ground in some areas, it gains footholds in new nations like Libya. In light of these ongoing national security challenges we face around the world, we must closely scrutinize the budget request to ensure critical priorities have sufficient funding, scarce resources are not devoted to underperforming programs, and where possible, allocate money to those areas that need additional funds. With regard to our military forces, after nearly a decade and a half of continuous military operations, we must take a hard look at the readiness levels across all the services. In fact, this committee has repeatedly heard testimony from senior military leaders that rebuilding readiness levels is their highest priority. The FY17 budget request makes needed investments in readiness accounts that will help the military services, but it will take time to rebuild readiness. That is why it is vitally important that readiness accounts be protected from cuts. I would welcome any comments from our witnesses on the importance of rebuilding readiness and if they believe the services are on track to meet their full spectrum readiness goals. Another challenge is the modernization of military platforms and equipment. While the readiness of our troops is paramount, we cannot neglect investments in modernization. Building and maintaining readiness levels requires that our forces have access to equipment that is properly sustained and upgraded. However, in order to meet the top-line funding levels set by the 2015 BBA, the Department's budget request modified base budget funding for some procurement and modernization efforts. While difficult choices must be made, we must ensure that this budget does not jeopardize shipbuilding and aviation procurement accounts, as well as targeted investments in research and development and that foster new technology. I would like to know if our witnesses feel confident that the reductions in the procurement accounts will not adversely impact these programs by adding substantial costs to the overall program or extensively delaying the fielding of any platform. The well-being and quality of life of our men and women in uniform and that of the civilian workforce remain a priority concern. We are mindful that we must support and maintain a high quality of life, but also a high quality of service. The administration's request includes a 1.6% pay raise for both the military and civilian employees and a robust array of benefits. These funds are critical to ensuring that military and civilian pay remains competitive in order to attract and retain the very best for military and government service. The committee also understands, however, that military and civilian personnel costs comprise nearly one-half of the Department's budget, and we are committed to implementing reforms that will slow that growth. Finally, we need to address the long-term budget situation that we find ourselves in. Last year, the Senate had a healthy debate on how to manage the needs in light of the Budget Control Act. At the time, I argued that meeting our national security challenges required relief for the Department of Defense, as well as other agencies that contributed to the defense and prosperity of the homeland. It is a daunting task to decide how to allocate finite resources for a myriad of priorities, and I recognize the Department had to make hard choices in order to comply with the 2015 budget agreement. I believe the Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, should repeal the BCA and establish a more reasonable limit on discretionary spending in an equitable manner that meets all of our needs as a nation. I look forward to this morning's testimony. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Mr. Secretary, and we look forward to hearing from you and then General Dunford. Thank you for appearing.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity. Chairman, Secretary, excuse me, Senator Reid, all the members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, for me, the Chairman, and for our Undersecretary. And above all, for your steadfast support to our DoD men and women all over the world, military and civilian alike, who serve and defend us. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm pleased to be here with Chairman Dunford, and we will be discussing the President's 2017 defense budget and other matters, a budget which marks a major inflection point for the Department of Defense. In this budget, we're taking the long view. We have to, because even as we fight today's fights, we must also be prepared for what might come 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road. Last fall's Bipartisan Budget Act gave us some much-needed stability after years of gridlock and turbulence, and I want to thank you and your colleagues for coming together to help pass it. That budget set the size of our budget, and with this degree of certainty, we focused on its shape, changing that shape in fundamental but carefully considered ways to adjust to a new strategic era and to seize opportunities for the future. Let me describe the strategic assessment that drove our budget decisions. First of all, it's evident that America is still today the world's foremost leader, partner, and underwriter of stability and security in every region of the world, as we've been since the end of World War II. That's thanks in large part to the unequivocal strength of the United States military. And as we continue to fulfill this enduring role, it's also evident that we're entering a new strategic era, as has been noted. Today's security environment is dramatically different from the last 25 years, requiring new ways of investing and operating. 5 evolving strategic challenges, namely Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and terrorism, are now driving DoD's planning and budgeting as reflected in this budget. I want to focus first on our ongoing fight against terrorism and especially ISIL, which we must and will deal a lasting defeat. Most immediately in its parent tumor in Iraq and Syria, but also where it's metastasizing. We're doing that in Africa and elsewhere, and also in Afghanistan, where we continue to stand with the Afghan government and people. And all the while, we're continuing to help to protect our homeland. And as we're accelerating our overall counter-ISIL campaign, we're backing it up with increased funding this year. We're requesting 50% more than last year. We've gained momentum against ISIL since the Chairman and I last appeared before you. Notably, the Iraqis retook Ramadi and are now reclaiming further ground in Anbar province. And in Syria, capable and motivated local forces supported by the United States and our global coalition have retaken the East Syrian town of Shadadi, severing the last major northern artery between Raqqa and Mosul, and therefore between ISIL in Syria and ISIL in Iraq. Meanwhile, 90% of our military coalition partners have committed to increase their contributions to help defeat ISIL. We've increased strikes on ISIL-held cash depots and oil revenues. We've conducted targeted strikes against ISIL in Libya. And we've also recently killed ISIL's Minister of War, the Chechen fighter Ammar al-Shashani. Now, before I continue, I want to say a few words about Russia's role. Russia said it was coming into Syria to fight ISIL, but that's not what it did. Instead, their military has only prolonged the civil war, propped up Assad, and as of now, we haven't seen whether Russia retained the leverage to find a diplomatic way forward, which is what the Syrian people need. One thing is clear, though. Russia's entry into Syria didn't impact our campaign against ISIL. Along with our coalition partners, we're intensifying our campaign against ISIL in both Iraq and Syria, and will continue to do so until ISIL is dealt a lasting defeat. Two of the other four challenges reflect a return in some ways to great power competition. One is in Europe, where we're taking a strong and balanced approach to deter Russian aggression. We haven't had to devote a significant portion of our defense investment to this possibility for a quarter century, but now we do. The other challenge is in the Asia-Pacific, where China is rising, which is fine, but behaving aggressively, which is not. There, we're continuing our rebalance to the region to maintain the stability we've underwritten for the past 70 years, allowing so many nations to rise and prosper in this, the single most consequential region for America's future. Meanwhile, two other long-standing challenges pose threats in specific regions. North Korea is one. That's why our forces on the Korean Peninsula remain ready, as they say, to fight tonight. The other is Iran, because while the nuclear accord is a good deal for preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, in other respects, our concerns with Iran persist. And while I'm on the subject of Iran, and given this committee's particular interest in this matter, I want to say a few words about Iran's treatment of our sailors on Farsi Island back in January. As I made clear then, Iran's actions were outrageous, unprofessional, and inconsistent with international law. And nothing we've learned about the circumstances of this incident since then changes that fact. And it's because of Iran's recklessness and destabilizing behavior in that part of the world that DoD remains full speed ahead in our investments, our planning, and our posture to ensure we deter Iran's aggression, counter its malign influence, and uphold our ironclad commitments to our regional friends and allies, especially Israel, to whom we maintain an unwavering and unbreakable commitment. Now, addressing all of these five challenges requires new investments on our part, new posture in some regions, and also new and enhanced capabilities. For example, we know we must deal with all these five challenges across all domains, not just the usual air, land, and sea, but also especially in cyber, electronic warfare, and space, where reliance on technology has given us great strengths and great opportunities, but also led to vulnerabilities that adversaries are eager to exploit. Key to our approach is being able to deter our most advanced competitors. We must have and be seen to have the ability to ensure that anyone who starts a conflict with us will regret doing so. In our budget, our capabilities, our readiness, and our actions, we must and we will be prepared for a high-end enemy, what we call full spectrum. In this context, Russia and China are our most stressing competitors, as they've both developed and continue to advance military systems that seek to threaten our advantages in specific areas. We see it in the South China Sea and in Crimea and Syria as well. In some cases, they're developing weapons and ways of war that seek to achieve their objectives rapidly before they think we can respond. Because of this, DoD has elevated their importance in our planning and budgeting. In my written testimony, I've detailed how our budget makes critical investments to help us address better these five evolving challenges. We're strengthening our deterrence posture in Europe by investing $3.4 billion for our European Reassurance Initiative, quadruple what we requested last year. We're prioritizing training and readiness of our ground forces, as has been noted, and reinvigorating the readiness and modernization of our fighter aircraft fleet. We're investing in innovative capabilities like the B-21 long-range strike bomber, microdrones, the Arsenal plane, as well as advanced munitions of all sorts. In our Navy, we're emphasizing not just increasing the number of ships, which we're doing, but especially their lethality with new weapons and high-end ships, and extending our commanding lead in undersea warfare, with new investments in unmanned undersea vehicles, for example, and more submarines with the versatile Virginia payload module that triples their strike capacity from 12 Tomahawks to 40. And we're doing more in cyber, electronic warfare, and space, investing in these three domains a combined total of $34 billion in 2017. To, among other things, help build our cyber mission force, develop next-generation electronic jammers, and prepare for the possibility of a conflict that extends into space. In short, DoD will keep ensuring our dominance in all domains. As we do this, our budget also seizes opportunities for the future. That's a responsibility I have to all my successors, to ensure the military and the Defense Department they inherit is just as strong, if not stronger, than the one I have the privilege of leading today. That's why we're making increased investments in science and technology, innovating operationally, and building new bridges to the amazing American innovative system, as we always have, to stay ahead of future threats. That's why we're building what I've called the force of the future, because as good as our technology is, it's nothing compared to our people. And in the future, we need to continue to recruit and retain the very best talent. Competing for good people for an all-volunteer force is a critical part of our military edge, and everyone should understand this need, my commitment to it. And because we owe it to America's taxpayers to spend our defense dollars as wisely and responsibly as possible, we're also pushing for needed reforms across the DoD enterprise, from continuously improving acquisitions to further reducing overhead to proposing new changes to the Goldwater-Nichols Act that defines much of our institutional organization. I know Goldwater-Nichols reform is a focus of this committee, and Chairman, I appreciate that. Goldwater-Nichols was important, had deeply positive results, but after 30 years, as you've said, it needs updates. There are some areas where the pendulum may have swung too far, like not involving the service chiefs enough in acquisition decision-making and accountability. And there are areas, as you've noted, where subsequent world events suggest nudging the pendulum further, like taking more steps to strengthen the capability of the chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to help address trans-regional threats, threats in multiple domains, and multiple threats within overlapping timeframes. As you know, last fall we began a comprehensive department-wide review of organizational issues like these to identify any potential redundancies, inefficiencies, or other areas of improvement to help formulate DoD's recommendations to you. I expect its internal findings by the end of March. This work is important. Though much is within our existing authority to do so, we look forward to working closely with Congress to implement needed reforms. And as we discussed over breakfast last week, Chairman and Senator Reid, I look forward to working with you personally on this important matter. Let me close on the broader shift reflected in this budget. The Defense Department doesn't have, as I've said, the luxury of just one opponent, or the choice between current fights and future fights. We have to do both. That's what this budget is designed to do, and we need your help to succeed. I thank this committee again for supporting the Bipartisan Budget Act that set the size of our budget. Our submission focuses on the budget shape, making changes that are necessary and consequential. We hope you approve it. I know some may be looking at the difference between what we proposed last year and what the budget deal gave us. A net total of about $11 billion less is provided by the Bipartisan Budget Act out of a total of almost $600 billion. But I want to reiterate that we've mitigated that difference, and we're prepared to explain how, and that this budget meets our needs. The budget deal was a good deal. It gave us stability. We're grateful for that. DoD's greatest risk is losing that stability this year and having uncertainty and sequester return in future years. That's why going forward, the biggest budget priority for us strategically is Congress averting the return of sequestration to prevent $100 billion in automatic cuts that are looming, so we can maintain stability and sustain all these critical investments over time. We've done this before, and that same support is essential today to address the security challenges we face and to seize the opportunities within our grasp. As long as we work together to do so, I know our national security will be on the right path, and America's military will continue to defend our country and help make a better world for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, General Dunford.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reid, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join Secretary Carter and Secretary McCord in appearing before you. I'm honored to represent the extraordinary men and women of the Joint Force. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, civil servants remain our single most important competitive advantage. And thanks to your support, the United States military is the most capable fighting force in the world. With your continued support, the Joint Force will continue to adapt, fight, and win in current operations while simultaneously innovating and investing to meet future challenges. I don't believe we ever should send Americans into a fair fight. Rather, we should maintain a joint force that has the capability and credibility to assure our allies and partners, deter aggression, and overmatch any potential adversary. This requires us to continually improve our joint warfighting capabilities, restore full-spectrum readiness, and develop the leaders who will serve as the foundation for the future. The United States is now confronted with challenges from both traditional state actors and non-state actors. The Department has identified 5 strategic challenges, and Secretary Carter has already addressed those. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea continue to invest in military capabilities that reduce our competitive advantage. They're also advancing their interests through competition with a military dimension that falls short of traditional armed conflict and the threshold for traditional military response. And examples include Russian actions in Ukraine, Chinese activities in the South China Sea, and Iran's malign activities across the Middle East. At the same time, non-state actors such as ISIL and al-Qaeda pose a threat to the homeland, the American people, our partners, and our allies. Given the opportunity, such extremist groups would fundamentally change our way of life. As we contend with the Department's 5 strategic challenges, we recognize that successful execution of our defense strategy requires that we maintain credible nuclear and conventional capabilities. Our strategic nuclear deterrent remains effective, but it's aging and it requires modernization. Therefore, we're prioritizing investments needed for a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. We're also making investments to maintain a competitive advantage in our conventional capabilities. And we must further develop capabilities in the vital and increasingly contested domains of cyber and space. As the Joint Force acts to mitigate and respond to challenges, we do so in the context of a fiscal environment that has hampered our ability to plan and allocate resources most effectively. Despite partial relief by Congress from sequester-level funding, the Department has absorbed $800 billion in cuts and faces an additional $100 billion of sequestration-induced risk through fiscal year 21. Absorbing significant cuts over the past 5 years has resulted in our underinvesting in critical capabilities. And unless we reverse sequestration, we'll be unable to execute the current defense strategy and specifically unable to address the challenges that Secretary Carter outlined. The fiscal year 17 budget begins to address the most critical investments required to maintain our competitive advantage. To the extent possible within the resources provided by the 2015 Bipartisan Budget Act, it addresses the Department's 5 challenges. It does so by balancing 3 major areas: investment in high-end capabilities, the capability and capacity to meet current operational demands, and the need to rebuild readiness after an extended period of war. In the years ahead, we'll need adequate funding levels and predictability to fully recover from over a decade at war and delayed modernization. A bow wave of procurement requirements in the future include the Ohio-class submarine replacement, continued cyber and space investments, and the long-range strike bomber. It will also be several years before we fully restore full-spectrum readiness across the services and replenish our stocks of critical precision munitions. In summary, I'm satisfied the FY17 budget puts us on the right trajectory, but it will take your continued support to ensure the Joint Force has the depth, flexibility, readiness, and responsiveness that ensures our men and women never face a fair fight. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Secretary McCord, do you have any statement?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I thank the witnesses. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your comments about the Iranian behavior and their subsequent behavior exploiting this humiliation of American service members. What action have you recommended that we take in response to this?
Well, everything we're doing in the Gulf, Chairman, including all of the actions that are funded in this budget, which include tens of thousands of Americans in the region. We want that. Our ballistic missile defense is in the region. We want that.
I see, but all of these things are planned in the budget. I wonder if you would plan on any specific action that the Iranians would know as a result of our humiliation of our service members.
Well, I've made it quite clear.
You made it quite clear that you're outraged and all that, but what specifically have you recommended to do in response to that?
We're continuing to take all of the actions that we need to
Obviously, the specific action in response to the Iranian outrage.
At the time of the incident, we prepared to protect our people. It turns out they were released in time. We later had the opportunity to see them being filmed in the way they were, and have made very clear that that's the kind of behavior we wouldn't want to engage in. Chairman, do you want to add anything?
Is stability in Afghanistan and the region in our national interest, particularly in light of the testimony of General Campbell and General Nicholson that the situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating?
I'll start there and then ask the chairman to chime in.
Fine.
Well, the situation in Afghanistan is very important to us. We have the Afghans had a tough fight this last fighting season. They're going to have a tough season this time, and it's important that we, not just we, but the rest of our coalition stay with them, not just this year in 2016, but in 2017 and so forth. And we're continually assessing and adjusting how we give support to the Afghan security forces.
But you don't disagree with General Nicholson and General Campbell, I guess I'll ask General Dunford, that the situation is deteriorating in Afghanistan. Do you agree with that?
Chairman, I listened to their testimony. I think they provided an accurate assessment of the situation in
Do
Afghanistan.
you consider the Taliban to be a threat to Afghanistan stability?
I do, Chairman.
Then why do U.S. forces not have the authority, other than self-defense, to target Taliban fighters in support of our Afghan partners?
Chairman, right now...
a threat to our stability, and the situation is deteriorating, and yet we were still don't give the authority of American forces to, other than self-defense, to target Taliban fighters.
Right now, Chairman, our authorities are focused on supporting the Afghan forces in their fight against the Taliban.
So even though the situation is deteriorating, even though they continue their attacks, even though then we still do not give the U.S. forces the authority to target Taliban fighters unless they're directly attacking the United States.
At this time, that's correct, Chairman.
Does that make sense to you?
Chairman, we're in the process of reviewing the lessons learned from 2015. We have some recommendations made by General Campbell.
We're well into 2016, and right now the plan is to cut the force from 9,800, drop down to 5,500 by the end of this year, and here we are in March.
Chairman, where I was going was we have recommendations from General Campbell for changes made to make in 2016 as a result of lessons learned in 2015. This week, we conducted a video teleconference, Secretary Carter and I, with General Nicholson, who's on the ground in Afghanistan right now, to get his thoughts. And we're in the process of making recommendations to the President for changes that might be made to make us more effective in supporting Afghan forces in 2016 and making them more successful.
Including the force levels?
A full range to include capabilities. That's correct, Chairman.
Last year, in the 2016 Future Years Defense Program, where you indicated that you needed an additional $37 billion above the BCA caps in 2016, the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said we're at the lower ragged edge of manageable risk. Now you're saying that it seems to be okay, even though the Army had to cut 24 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, the Air Force had to cut 5 F-35s and 45 over the next 4 years. The Navy plans to lay up an additional 5 cruisers. The Marine Corps plans to cut 77 joint light tactical vehicles and $1.3 billion in military construction, et cetera, et cetera. All of those cuts are being made as opposed to what you asked for last year. So now you're saying that we can, and by the way, we've seen this bow waves movie before. When you cut F-35s, when you cut the Black Hawks, when you cut them, you increase the costs because the original plans are at optimum cost. So now you're satisfied with the level, which is $17 billion less than last year, even though your predecessor said we were on the lower ragged edge of manageable risk with the amount we had last year, which was $17 billion more. It's hard for us to understand, General.
Chairman, to be clear, what I've said is that the budget this year is sufficient to execute the strategy. There is associated risk in that, and I've provided a classified risk assessment to the Secretary. You'll see that some of the investments that we've made this year are designed to address that risk. My most significant concern, frankly, is the bow wave of modernization that has been deferred that we're going to start to see in fiscal year 19, 20, 21, and 22. So by no means have I said that the resource level for the department as we look out over the next few years is adequate. What I simply said was that this year's fiscal year 17 budget is sufficient to meet the strategy.
So it's okay with you to cut 24 Black Hawks, 5 F-35s, 45 over the next 4 years. Marine Corps cut 77 joint light tactical vehicles, $1.3 billion in military construction, which last year was told to this committee that you needed.
Chairman, that's not what I said. I didn't say it was okay to do those things. What I said was, with regard to this budget, we have made the best decisions that we can within the top line that we were given from Congress. So what I'm comfortable with is that we have made the right priorities. I'm not comfortable that we have addressed all the requirements.
Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. One of the key issues that the committee is focused on and you're focused on is readiness. And General Dunford, readiness is a function of not only resources but time. Can you explain, or at least I think the question is, within the constraints you face was significant, you have tried to maintain and improve readiness. That won't happen just with more money. That'll take time. Excuse me.
Senator, thank you. That's right. From my perspective, there's three components. There's the money, there's the time, and then there's operational tempo. And the operational tempo has maintained at a very high level, even as the force has drawn down from its peak 3 or 4 years ago. As a result of sequestration, and particularly in 2013, we laid off a lot of engineers, we laid off a lot of artisans, we had a backlog of maintenance. That's going to take time to recover from that backlog of maintenance. In some cases, we deferred modernization issues, equipment and so forth that will have an impact on readiness. And then being able to recover from a training perspective requires an operational tempo that's much more sustainable than one we have right now. So from my perspective, that's why it's going to take, and I think you've heard from the service chiefs, in probably the near term, one of the services will be ready in about 3 or 4 years, and the Air Force at the outside, I think, has identified 2024 before it fully recovers. And much of that is a function of aircraft maintenance and readiness.
But in the context of this budget, the resources that you have available, the dollars for readiness, is sufficient at least to continue the improvement in readiness that you must achieve. Is that your estimate?
Senator, the Secretary prioritized the readiness, particularly the readiness of those forces that will deploy. And so we have bought as much readiness as we can in FY17. Many of the issues that we have with regard to readiness can't be addressed with additional resources this year. Again, they'll take time.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary or Mr. McCord, again, with respect to procurement, my understanding, but please correct me, is that you've done all you can to maintain multi-year contracting for systems, which essentially keeps us in the ballgame, if you will. But if we do not fix the sequestration problem next year, this fragile structure will sort of fall apart. But we are still maintaining the cost-efficient multi-year contracting.
We are.
And we're not cutting back on those deals.
No, we are. And this gets to the point the chairman raised about how did we accommodate the difference between what we planned last year and what we got in the bipartisan budget agreement. That what I described as a net of $11 billion of our almost $600 billion. How did we accommodate that? As the chairman said, and I was very insistent upon this, as was the chairman, we protected readiness. So the principal impact came in a number of modernization programs to include aircraft, shipbuilding, a number of minor modernization programs. That's what we did. It's all out there, and I'm sure you'll be reviewing it. What we didn't do was not fund the service readiness recovery plans, because they try to move back to full spectrum readiness from where they've been after the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. That's what we need in all of the services is full spectrum. Making up some of the maintenance backlog that particularly affects Marine Corps aviation. We did not change any of our end strength goals. We did not change military compensation to make this difference. We didn't terminate, to your point, any major programs, any multi-year contracts. We didn't RIF any employees. We didn't have to do any of that, but we did have to make adjustments, and they're there for you to see. And are we happy making those adjustments? No, but that's what we needed to do to accommodate the bipartisan budget agreement. Now, if the bipartisan budget agreement were to fall apart, as everyone has said, that is our biggest strategic danger, because that will affect in the future years our ability to recover full spectrum readiness. It will affect all those things that we did not have to affect this year. But that's how we adjusted to the bipartisan budget agreement.
And just the final point is that the concurrence of the opinion that's expressed by, I think, everyone here about the need to end sequestration for 2018 is critical, paramount, has to be done.
That is the greatest strategic risk to the Department of Defense, is the reversion to sequestration. I very much hope we can avoid that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to ask a question about Gitmo, and this is a budget hearing, but it's one that you should both be aware of, that there are two groups of people at this table up here. One is the hardliners who feel it's just absurd to even think about giving up the resources that we have there, and particularly in light of the fact that we have a recidivism rate of what, 30% or so. Others are going to be talking about, asking questions about that, so I'll let them take the time to do that, but that'll be one of the considerations you have. You know, it's easy to kind of get, I'm not saying that we're hearing glowing reports right now, but we do hear all the time, as you said, Secretary Carter, we have the best equipped, the best trained, and all of that. That sounds good. That's the good side, but there's a bad side, too. We're not where we normally should be and have been in the past. If you, we've had probably more hearings in the years that I've been on both the House and the Senate Armed Services Committee this year than we've ever had before, and I think that's the right thing to do. People are going to have to wake up and know the problems that we have. Now, when we, before this committee, Lieutenant General Nicholson said the security situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating. I think we probably agree with that. Last week, General Austin, before this committee, he's the CENTCOM commander, in response to Senator McCain's question, he testified to this committee just last week that it may be time to reconsider the plan to reduce America's military forces in Afghanistan. General Dunford, is he right?
Senator, thank you. As a matter of fact, we're in a process right now of reviewing.
Of reconsidering.
Absolutely. It's a constant process, Senator, and the Secretary and I have spent a fair amount of time on it just this week with General Nicholson, and we spent some time with General Campbell before he left. And we're in the process of bundling together some recommendations to bring forth to the President.
You know, we hear dates all the time about when something's going to be decided. Now, that isn't a better idea to let conditions on the ground determine what and when we're going to changes we're going to make.
Senator, I think that's exactly what we did in the fall when a decision was made to keep 9800 through 2016. So I agree with that.
The two quotes that I gave from General Austin and General Nicholson, have you discussed with them specifically about the force structure requirements?
We have, Senator.
Okay. Have you presented any of the recommendations to the President?
We have not yet, Senator. That we're still in the process of deliberating that between the Secretary and I, and we had a video teleconference with General Nicholson this week to make sure that we get the latest from him. He's now had a chance to, in both his pre-deployment site survey as well as being on the ground now since taking command, he's had a chance to make a personal assessment. It was important to both the Secretary and I that we heard from General Nicholson before we went and moved forward.
Okay, let me include one more thing that I want to get in this committee, because we've had a lot of people testifying, the very best that we have, and I have a great deal of respect for all of them, and they are very blunt about the problems that we have. Admiral Courtney, NORTCOM commander, he testified to this committee just last week that North Korea's recent nuclear tests And satellite launch demonstrate that Kim Jong-un, which we know is mentally deranged, his commitment to developing strategic capabilities as well as his disregard for the UN security resolutions. We all, I think, agree with that. Admiral Harris said, the PACON commander, he testified to this committee that Chinese coercion, artificial island construction, militarization in the South China Sea threaten the most fundamental aspect of global prosperity, freedom of navigation, and their forces are opening at a higher tempo in more places with greater sophistication than ever before. Do the two of you agree with that?
I certainly do, Senator. And this is, by the way, why we need to remain vigilant with respect to North Korea and its ballistic missile activities and other activities I mentioned fight tonight. And this is why we need the budget that we're asking for and why we've got to avoid sequestration in the future. These are all serious matters.
Well, all serious matters. I contend that we're in the most threatened position we've ever been in as a nation. I look back wistfully at the days of the Cold War. I mean, right now we have people like mentally deranged people might have a capability of wiping out an American city. So that's a serious thing. I would only leave you with a quote that both of you heard last week from Congressman Frelinghuysen when he read you a quote made by Winston Churchill 70 years ago. And this is the quote. It says, from what I have, and particularly keeping in mind of what Putin has been doing in Ukraine and other places, disregarding the threat that we would pose to him. He said 70 years ago, from what I have seen of our Russian friends and allies during the war, I am convinced that there is nothing they admire so much as strength, and there's nothing for which they have less respect for than weakness, especially military weakness. I want you guys to keep that in mind as you're developing this budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for your service and for this hearing. I want to talk briefly about cyber. Cyber attacks against the homeland are already a menacing threat to U.S. infrastructure, businesses, and defense. In the case of a severe domestic attack, DoD's unified commands will be responsible for coordinating a response in support of the Department of Homeland Security. However, Cybercom has reported a projected shortfall in its manning goals for fiscal year 2018, and there are concerns that DoD cyber operators, both active and reserve, may not be able to seamlessly operate under the current patchwork of relevant authorities. How would you assess current coordination and interoperability between Northcom, Stratcom, and Homeland Security, and what could be done legislatively to complement those relationships? And can you describe the level of involvement the National Guard cyber operators might play in the event of a major domestic cyber attack? And do you believe they are adequately trained, equipped, and funded to meet that expectation? And finally, do you believe each responsible agency with cyber or mandate, defense or otherwise, currently has the authorities it needs to coordinate an effective response domestically?
Thank you, Senator. Let me take the part about the Guard first, if I may. I was out in Washington State a couple of weeks ago where there is a terrific National Guard unit working on exactly what you're talking about, that is defending the nation and also defending our DoD networks upon which we're so dependent from cyber attack. These are people whose day job is to be the cyber defenders for some of our most important IT companies and tech companies. So they're at the highest skill level that the private sector has, and yet they're making their skills available to their country through the National Guard. So this is a tremendous strength among many of the National Guard, the ability to bring to us a talent that we would otherwise have difficulty attracting and retaining. To get to your first part of your question, nevertheless, we do try to attract and retain, and we have some success in that regard, and that's what we're doing as we build out the 133 cyber mission teams for Cybercom. Cybercom does work not only with our combatant commanders on wartime needs, including, by the way, joining the fight against ISIL and disrupting ISIL and blacking out ISIL, but also defending the country. Now, we do that, as you suggest, in connection with Homeland Security, in connection with law enforcement. All that's perfectly appropriate. There are some legislative acts that have enabled us better in that regard. It's possible that we could do still better in that regard. With respect to Cybercom's own authorities, I will tell you that we adjust them continuously, and just this week, actually, I'm talking to Admiral Rogers about some of his authorities and what we can do to expand those authorities. So it's a very actively
So could you
moving
submit a
field.
letter to me or this committee if there's additional authorities you feel you need?
Will do.
So we can work on that. With regard to military sexual assault, you're aware that every year I've been asking for files from the 4 major bases, and this year I added the 4 major training bases, so I could just get a snapshot in time as how do these cases go? What do they actually look like once they're filed and once they're taken to court? What we find is that more than half of the victims are civilians, which isn't entirely captured by our survey, spouses and civilians, not fully captured. And the second thing I learned was that there's a 50% drop-off rate. Once someone actually files a complaint, about 50% do not continue with their complaint during the course of the year, which is a huge problem. And so one of the things that this committee's done is we are going to put in place a Defense Advisory Committee on Investigations, Prosecution, and Defense of Sexual Assault. And that's supposed to be an independent civilian review board that looks at this, designated by the president. It's very important to me that the executive director of this committee is independent so that they can actually give us advice. And I would like your commitment that you will look at the staffing of that individual. And I'm hoping that you will choose a civilian to be the executive director and one with prosecutorial experience, specifically experience in sexual violence prosecutions, which are among the hardest to ever end in a conviction.
Well, first of all, I thank you for your leadership in this issue. It's a really important issue. Of course, we'll work with the committee on this, and I promise you that, as in other matters. And I'll just say very clearly to you how much I appreciate your leadership on this issue, because this is unacceptable in our military, because our military is about honor and it's about trust, and sexual assault violates honor and trust, so we can't have any of it. And the more we learn, the more we, as you say, there are other dimensions to it. Civilians, retaliation, which is another thing that you have rightly stressed we need to pay attention to. So this is something that we cannot stop learning about and doing better about. And in this respect, I promise to continue to work with you.
Thank you. And General Dunford, because I'm out of time, I'm going to submit for the record a specific question about combat integration that I would love your response on.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carter, I'd like you to talk more about the third offset initiative. Specifically, what is new about it? Is it new money? Is it a new way of using that money? As you know, we spend tens of billions of dollars every single year researching and developing technologies, and that is well in excess of our adversaries. And this committee's heard a lot about how our technological edge is eroding. So I'm wondering if that level of investment, and specifically the way we are using it, wasn't sustaining our technological advantage. What about the offset initiative is going to ensure that that avoids a similar fate?
Well, thank you, Senator. And our efforts are about both new money and new ways of using that money. The new money we are asking for in this budget, notwithstanding the $11 billion that we absorbed. We didn't take that in our RDT&E. We are increasing research, development, test, and engineering relative to last year. Science and technology, which is a part of that also. But we are doing it in new ways, and I'll give you a couple examples of that, 2 very important examples. One is reaching out to the high-tech industry that does not have a tradition of working with the Department of Defense. When I started out in this business long ago, it was all the major technologically intensive companies in America worked with the Defense Department. It was part of the legacy of World War II and the Cold War. I'm trying to, and we are trying in the third offset, to rekindle those relationships with the high-tech industry. We find them willing, patriotic, eager to help serve. We have to do it in a way that's compatible with their business and technology models, and we're doing that. And secondly, we have some innovative new parts of our department. One I've called attention to is the Strategic Capabilities Office. which is specifically looking at and has already made major progress in highly innovative things like electronic warfare drones. That's the place where the idea of giving the SM-6 missile an anti-ship capability came from, taking an old system, giving it a brand new capability. So we're trying to back the innovators in our department as well as connect with the best parts of innovative American society, because next to our people, our technology is what makes us great, and we get our technology because we're part of the most innovative country in the world.
So you would say that the process for developing these technologies, would you say that it has not been working in the past, and that's one of the main focuses then of the offset, is to not only work within the department, but also to reach outside the department, and not necessarily looking at specific programs, but having a more open, innovative mind on this, then?
Certainly, that's what it comes down to. Both our traditional programs, we need to make them move along faster, make them more agile, do a better job of incorporating technology in them, and reaching out to the innovative part of our society and trying to getting them interested in these vitally important national security problems and working with us, as has been the tradition in America for decades and decades.
Right, and you know innovation is very risky. So when we're looking at putting more money into the programs, I think all of us realize that losses are going to occur. We're not going to see a success rate with every program that you're trying for. There will be no results in some areas.
That's correct. If you don't take risk.
But we're not in a risk-tolerant environment. How do you address that?
Well, that's a problem. But we want our innovators to take risk. Taking risk, by definition, means that sometimes things won't go the way you'd hoped. When you're exploring a technological frontier, when you're testing a weapon system, and we have to be tolerant of risk, provided that risk was taken advisedly in the interests of making a leap ahead in technology. We have to do that. If we're too risk averse, then we're always going to be behind the technological curve and not up with or above the technological curve. And our enemies take risks. No question, our potential enemies take those risks. We need to take those risks also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you for your testimony. General Dunford, you were in an interchange with the chair about how you look at PB-17 and whether it does all you might want to do. I think you said, quote, our budget is based on the top line that Congress gave us. And then as I look at your written testimony, I'll just read it. To accommodate a constrained top line, PB-17 defers near-term modernization, which will only exacerbate a coming bow wave of strategic recapitalization and other procurement requirements. More broadly, the cumulative effect of top-line reductions over the past several years has limited the flexibility and resiliency of the joint force. And looking ahead, I'm concerned that the demand for future capabilities and capacity will outpace the resources available, forcing even more difficult decisions to match strategy and resources. The constraint that we're talking about with respect to these top lines is the 2011 sequester BCA caps, correct?
That's correct, Senator, and I think particularly, as I recall, fiscal year 2013 was particularly devastating to our ability to plan and execute.
We had an opportunity to turn off sequester before it went into effect on March 1, 2013, and we chose not to turn it off, and then that has created downstream challenging consequences. So the real issue, I think, for us, if we put national security first, has got to be what do we do about that constraint? Now, what we've done is we've done two-year budget deals in a row that have averted some of the sequester cuts and provided some relief from the BCA caps. But in each instance, when we did that, we also pushed the budget caps out an additional 2 years. So you are facing the reality of it's like an automatic snapback sanction in these budget caps. If Congress were to not agree on a budget, and we've got a history of not agreeing on stuff over time, we will snap back to a punishing sanction against our own nation's ability to defend ourselves, and we've now pushed that out significantly into the future, into the late 2020s. And that's the risk that you're talking about, the risk of falling back into sequester and punishing our national security is the significant concern that we're grappling with.
Senator, that's exactly right. But even if we avert sequester, we've now accumulated bills that will all come due simultaneous. And as I alluded to in my opening statement, the modernization of nuclear enterprise will come now at the very same time that we'll start to recover from some of the deferred modernization over the last several years. So even at the originally projected level of funding that the Department asked for, I would assess that probably in the late teens and early 20s, again, we'll hit this bow wave of modernization that will make it very difficult to balance readiness, force structure, infrastructure, and modernization. And that's the balance that we try to have. And the more out of balance we have become over the last few years, the more difficult it will be to achieve balance in the out years.
There are some who I think I've heard argue that we don't need to worry that much about sequester and the BCA caps, because what we can do is we can just plus up the OCO accounts as we kind of approach the budgetary challenges each year to try to deal with these issues. Now, from my way of thinking, that can be some short-term temporary relief, but OCO, which should have a particular role in a defense budget, obviously, but OCO is not money that you can really count on. You can't count on it for following years, and so you could get OCO money in a year, but you would still face the sequester coming back. You're not sure whether you can count on OCO money the following year. Wouldn't you agree with me that sort of relying upon successive annual battles about OCO funding is not near the same as providing you with the kind of certainty that you need to have?
Senator, we need three things. We need predictability, we need the right level of resources, and we need those resources to be in the right areas. We need all three of those, and so I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, my hope is, as we are talking about the NDA this year, is that we will really grapple with this sort of snapback sanction that we're imposing on ourselves, which if we ever fell into it, I mean, again, I hope we're always going to be able to reach agreements, but we've now pushed this sequester and the BCA caps out for quite some time, and if somebody decides to hold up the process or we just can't reach an agreement for good faith reason, we have just built this self-punishment into our mechanism. And I hope part of what we might try to do in the NDA this year is just agree, look, we are not required to continue a sequester that was put in place with budget caps in the summer of 2011, pre-ISIL, pre-Russia into the Ukraine, pre-North Korea cyber attacks, pre-Ebola, pre-Zika. We don't have to live by a 2011 reality in 2016. And if anyone will see this and the importance of it in Congress, it's going to be the Armed Services Committees in both houses. We should be at the forefront of this, and I know the Chairman has made this an important priority and will continue to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm glad Senator Kane brought this up, because it's exactly what I wanted to start with, and the Chair has made this a priority. Let me just ask you, Secretary Carter and General Dunford, looking back several years ago, when sequester was headed our way, but we really didn't think it was a reality, I would ask people in your chair, other people, are you planning for sequester? And their answer was no. We're not planning for it. It was never intended. We're sure you, ladies and gentlemen, will fix it. And it's unthinkable that we would do this. And of course, the unthinkable happened, and we had to deal with it. Now, we've dealt with it once, and that was bad enough. But tell us about how going there a second time would be a whole new problem. And also, General Dunford, and I'll let you go first, did I hear you say, if we avoid sequester this time, we still don't have enough money to take care of the national defense needs that you have to take care of? Is that what you're saying?
Senator, is. What I'm saying is that even at a level of funding that avoids sequestration, we have a bow wave of modernization that's in part a result of the last 3 or 4 years of the budget. and also a result of that bow wave for the nuclear enterprise that I alluded to. So when you look at deferred modernization, the modernization that we would do in a normal course of events, plus the nuclear enterprise, all coming due at or about the same time, my assessment is that we will be challenged even if we are at above sequestration level of funding. And with regard to the other $100 billion, I would just simply say, and Senator Kaine has listed the things that have all changed since the Defense Strategic Guidance was written in 2012. My assessment is that if we are confronted with...
So let's reiterate those, and because I've
well, it's very simple.
interrupted your train of thought. We're talking Russia, we're talking ISIL.
I'm talking Russia, I'm talking ISIL, I'm talking the behavior of North Korea, I'm talking increased malign influence by Iran, and I'm talking about the activity in China, which concerns us in terms of maintaining a competitive advantage. Their investment over time in their defense capabilities and some of their behavior in the Pacific also concerns me from a competitive advantage perspective. So I would say there have been profound changes in each of the 5 challenge areas identified by the Secretary that should inform future budgets.
Okay, and Secretary Carter, is there some room in your shop where we are planning for this disastrous eventuality if we're not able to reach an agreement and if the law of the land, which is sequestration again, kicks in?
Well, first of all, let me associate myself with everything that Chairman Dunford said is exactly right. And with respect to your question, Senator, sadly, the Department did learn what it was like to feel sequester, and I can say what some of the effects are, and you'll immediately see why we're so concerned about it kicking back in the future. Uncertainty and turbulence cause us to do things inefficiently, managerially, so like issuing short-term contracts, turning things on and off. The strategy that the chairman was just referring to and the 5 major threats we face, those aren't one-year things. And we can't budget and program 1 year at a time, herky-jerky fashion, and meet those. It's unfair to our people for them to have budgetary uncertainty. They look here, they look to Washington, and they wonder what's going on and what is their future. I'm concerned about the picture it paints in the world when we do this to ourselves, to our friends and also our potential foes. So we do know what the consequences are. We did go through it in recent years, and it has very deleterious effects on how we manage ourselves and how we protect ourselves. And the last thing I'd like to say is also to associate myself with something the chairman said, particularly with respect to the nuclear enterprise. We see bills out there to keep a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear arsenal, just to pick one very big item, which will include the Ohio replacement class submarine, ICBM, modernization, we go down that road, and other things. And that money is going to have to be provided for us to have that. That's a bedrock capability. So averting sequestration, absolutely necessary. But on top of that, we're going to need the funding that the country needs in future years to defend ourselves and protect our people.
Well, thank you. We rely on you to tell us what you need, and let's speak it out loudly and clearly from both sides of this table. And make it clear that what is at stake is nothing less than the national security of Americans. Thank you, all 3.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We often remark in this committee to thank the witnesses for their service to our nation, and truly we have 3 individuals this morning who have served our country over many years with extraordinary and unique distinction. So I thank you for all of your service to our nation. Secretary Carter, you noted in your testimony that we do not have the luxury of choosing between strategic challenges that our nation faces, and certainly one of those challenges is undersea warfare. As you know, our attack submarine force is projected to fall below the minimum desirable 48 boats by 2025, and it may go as low as 41 by 2029. Our submarines are among our most versatile, stealthy, and strong forces available to defend and also to conduct offensive operations. Considering the gap that we are approaching in submarine capabilities, wouldn't it be wise to consider building 3 submarines a year, 2 Virginia-class, along with the Ohio replacement program? Would you support such a move?
Senator, thanks. First of all, with respect to your general point about the critical importance of undersea dominance, that's an area where our military excels over all others. It's a critical area that we are targeting in this critical budget to keep and extend that advantage. It involves submarine construction. It involves, as I mentioned, the Virginia payload module. Some other things like unmanned undersea vehicles, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't, and a host of other undersea capabilities. So that's a major thrust of this budget. With respect to submarine building numbers, we have laid into the budget this year as we planned, and we sustained that. We stuck with that. Our 2 submarines per year through the FIDIP. Your question is, will we, as we get to the point of the Ohio-class replacement, in the future want to add submarine shipbuilding capability and ships per year? Yes. That gets back to the point about having the money when we begin the Ohio replacement to keep a safe, secure, and reliable deterrent. We can't have that at the expense of our general purpose Navy. That's a point we've all been making, and that's going to require additional funding.
So if the shipbuilding capacity is there to do it, you would favor going that route of 3 submarines a year if necessary to meet that gap?
Yes, we're going to need to build the Ohio-class replacement submarine without shorting the rest of our undersea dominance.
Secretary Carter, thank you. Earlier in the week, I think you met with Israel's defense minister and others in the military establishment there. Can you commit to us that you will ensure that Israel maintains its qualitative military aid, and can you update us as to when the negotiations on the Memorandum of Understanding will be done?
I obviously have that commitment. That's something that my good friend and colleague, Israeli Defense Minister Yalon, and I discussed, and we will do that. With respect to the MOU, that's something that the President and the Prime Minister discuss, so it's not something that the 2 defense ministers decide. However, in our conversations, which are frequent, the Minister Yalon and I do discuss what the Israelis need now and going forward, and we use that to inform those discussions about over the MOU and the amount of help that we give to the Israelis to defend themselves in what is a very dangerous region.
Finally, I have long been concerned, as many of my colleagues have been, about the Iran ballistic missile program, its continuing testing. I led a letter to President Obama with a number of my colleagues calling for immediate enforcement of sanctions against Iran, and the Department of Treasury, following the letter, did indeed enforce sanctions against 11 entities and individuals supporting Iran's missile program. Clearly, more must be done to deter Iran from continued aggressive pursuit of this program. General Botel and General Austin, literally within the past week or so, testified to this committee about the need for increased sanctions. Do you agree?
I do. That's not a responsibility of the department, but a responsibility of the department that we very much fulfill, and I know you discussed with them, is our defensive commitments with respect to Iranian ballistic missiles, both for our forces in the region and our friends and allies who include Israel, but there are others as well. That's why We have the missile defense and other capabilities in the Gulf and why we need to keep them strong. And I did discuss those also with Defense Minister Yalon, including the help we give to the Israelis with respect to Iron Dome and David Sling and Arrow, which are their 3 tiers of their own territorial defense against ballistic missiles.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Sessions, please.
Thank you very much. I won't say would-be chairman, but actual chairman, I suppose, for a second. The man who would be chairman. Well, it's a political world we're living in. General Dunford, when we look at the Middle East, we've had a number of witnesses testify here over recent months about it. I have come to the conclusion that there's just going to be a lot of violence for a long time. There won't be one victory that would make us safe. I've talked with our Democrat colleagues, and from their comments in the committee meetings, it seems to me that we do need and can maybe even agree upon a strategy that could be bipartisan, that could extend beyond elections, that maybe the whole world would be able to support on how we confront this rising tide of violence and extremism. Do you think that's possible, and how close are we to achieving something like that?
Senator, I do think it's possible. I think we've done a lot of work, certainly internal to the department, to take a long-term view of the Middle East and how to deal with the challenges inside of the Middle East. And I couldn't agree more. You know, we can't, no more than we can develop a budget year to year and expect to be successful, can we develop a strategy year to year and make lurching changes and expect to be successful. So I think that a basic thesis, can we get a bipartisan strategy and an approach to the Middle East that will carry out what we have assessed to be a generational conflict? I fully concur with that.
So you assess it as a generational conflict, meaning more than 20 years or more.
Senator, I think if you look at the underlying conditions that have led to violent extremism, I can't imagine addressing those in anything less than that period of time. When you look at the economic issues, the social issues, the political issues, the educational issues, those are all things that will take a long period of time. And my assessment is that violent extremism in some form will exist until those conditions across the Middle East are addressed.
Secretary Carter, do you agree with that?
I do, and I'd go even further than that. I mean, first, what can't be tolerated in a generational way is ISIL. And that's why we're so intent upon accelerating the defeat of ISIL. But to the chairman's point and to your point, Senator, that isn't going to automatically create a Middle East that is free of extremism, and it's not going to create a world that's free of terrorism, because the trends in technology put more and more destructive power in the hands of smaller and smaller groups. So we recognize, and it's part of our approach to our future defense, that both non-state and state actors need to figure in the investment portfolio of the defense of this country going forward. Both of those are featured in our long-term budget. Even though we expect and need to defeat ISIL in the short term, we're making investments to protect ourselves against non-state actors for the more distant future, and I think we have to.
Well, I tend to agree with that. We need to focus on who needs to be confronted militarily and defeated as soon as possible, and certainly ISIL is number one on that list. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
But at the same time, we have allies in the region. We have allies who oppose some of these forces we oppose. We have some people in the region that would support people that we oppose. So it's a very complex region, is it not? And we have to be, and we need as many allies as we can have. And some of this fighting needs to be done by other people than us over the decade or generation to come. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree, and I'll just add to that. I was in Brussels a few weeks ago. I brought together all the defense ministers of all the countries that are part of the Counter-ISIL coalition, and essentially my message was exactly as you say. We're willing to lead this. We're willing to do a lot because we're powerful. But we need others to get in the game. And particularly, we need those in the region to play their part. Additionally, we need, and we're finding, more partners on the ground. Because both in Syria and Iraq, it's not only necessary to defeat ISIL, but it's necessary to sustain the defeat. And only those who live in the region can sustain that defeat. So we can help them, we can lead them, but they need to do their part. And I emphasize to them that we are going to defeat ISIL, and we'll remember who played their role and who didn't.
Well, thank you. I guess my time's up. I would just thank my colleagues that have expressed concerns about this overall policy of the United States. I believe we could get there. I believe we can achieve a policy that defends the legitimate interests of the United States in a bipartisan way, and it can be sustained no matter who gets elected president in the years to come. And I think that's important because a great nation can't be flip-flopping around on commitments around the globe. Thank you all.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Donnelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here. Secretary Carter, we're still losing over 400 service members each year to suicide. We were able to get in the FY15 NDAA a requirement for, under the Jacob Sexton Act, that every service member receive a person-to-person mental health assessment every year. Can you provide me with an update on the status of the Sexton Act's implementation and when the department will roll out those annual mental health examinations?
Thanks, Senator, and thanks for your interest in this issue, which is an important part of the welfare of our folks. It is something that we've become increasingly attentive to, and I'll get back to you on the specifics of the implementation of that program. The thing I do know and want to say is that this is being reflected in our health care investments. As you know, we spend about $50 billion a year out of the $600 or so billion we're requesting for you on health care. And over the last few years, we have increased greatly the amount directed at mental health to provide our folks with resilience, which is what the program you're talking about, so that they are not as vulnerable and susceptible to the kinds of things that might drive them to such an extreme act. And also that we're treating people who already have reached the point where they have that kind of impulse. So I'll get back to you with the specifics, but it's very important.
And to continue to remove the stigma from trying
to
get help.
We want people to seek mental health treatment when they need it, and we want everyone who's not seeking it to look sympathetically upon that, like getting any other kind of medical treatment.
Thank you. And Mr. Secretary, I know how busy you are and the challenges we face around the globe. And one part of trying to solve those problems are national labs. As you know, in Indiana, we have Crane Naval Warfare Center. We had talked about you possibly coming to visit just a morning or a late afternoon or a late evening or a mid-morning at 3 in the morning visit, so you can get an understanding of the strengths and challenges. When do you think we could make that happen?
I look for will you come with me?
Yes.
Okay.
Even at 3 in the morning.
It's a deal, and I love visiting all of our folks. There's nothing better than going out and getting among the people who serve this department. In this case, it'll be laboratory scientists, but whether they're troops or scientists or folks in industry, they're all part of what makes our military great. We'll have a wonderful time, I promise.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. General Dunford, when you see what has just happened with Vladimir Putin, how do you judge that? What do you think he is doing? How will that affect things in Syria?
Senator, honestly, it's too early to tell what he's doing, and I think those who have tried to predict Vladimir Putin's behavior have been universally proven wrong. What I would say is this, though, that when Putin went into Syria, he said his express purpose was to go down and address ISIL, and ISIL is not addressed. And so what I think it does do is it makes it clear that his original intent was not what he said it was, which was to go after ISIL, but it was obviously to support the regime. And I think what it also does is, for those who question whether the United States is the most reliable partner in the region or not, I would just say, for the record, we're still there.
Right. Let me ask you and then the Secretary, how do we get to Raqqa? And, you know, the next question obviously is when, and there's no exact date on that, but if you could give us an idea of how we get this done and how we eliminate ISIS presence on the ground, because it creates a danger to us.
Senator, one thing I would say is we're already isolating Raqqa right now and made significant progress over the last couple of months in limiting the freedom of movement between Raqqa and Mosul, cut that line of communication between Iraq and Syria. We've isolated Raqqa to the north with Syrian democratic forces who seized an area called Shadadi, which again further cut the lines of communication. We have grown the capability and capacity of the indigenous forces that we're supporting in Syria quite a bit. In fact, had I testified a month ago, I would have told you that we had about 2,500 Arabs inside of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Today, I can tell you we have 5,000 that are currently planning another operation that will further isolate Raqqa.
Do you see, just as an aside, not to interrupt you, that number continuing to grow significantly?
Senator, I do, and I think that's my projection in the future is based on what's now recently happened. The more success we have, and we've always said that, the more success we have, we'll have what the Secretary described as a snowball effect, where people now are more willing to join us because they see the level of support that we're providing, and more importantly, the level of success that these forces are having.
That's exactly right, Senator. And what we described in December is transpiring, namely the SDF is growing in size, the Arab component of that. They're on the move. They've taken Shadadi, and you're right, Raqqa is a key target because that's what ISIL calls its capital. And we need to take that away from them and make it clear that a state based upon the ideology of ISIL is not tolerable. We are, in addition to backing those forces, pressuring Raqqa in lots of other ways, from the air, but other ways as well. I want to raise something while we're on this, which is we have, which is very important. In order for us to win, we need to constantly revise and adjust and take advantage of opportunities. We're trying to take advantage of opportunity right now, the Syrian Arab Coalition. In that connection, if I may, I need to plead for your help in releasing some of the funds that are allocated to precisely that purpose. And it's not just about this committee, but we made a request for those funds, and we got 4 different answers from 4 different committees. I know that's how the system works, but it's really tough to wage a campaign under those circumstances. So if I can plead for, as we try to be agile, I can plead for some agility in responding to our funding requests. I'm very grateful to.
It's timely urgent right now.
It is time urgent.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here and for your leadership service to our country. I wanted to ask, New Hampshire is facing a terrible epidemic of heroin and fentanyl that is coming over the southern border, and it's killing people in our states. And recently the Senate passed what's called the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act to deal with the prevention and treatment side and some support for our first responders. But we know from prior testimony, both from our NORTHCOM and SouthernCom commanders, that the networks that are being used to traffic the drugs into our country also are networks that can be used to essentially traffic anything. And so I wanted to ask both you, Secretary Carter, and General Dunford, what can we do to get SouthCom and NORTHCOM the resources they need to tamp down on these networks that not only are killing people in our country, but also can be used networks to traffic other dangerous things into our country, including used by terrorist networks?
Well, I'll start, and then I particularly want the chairman to comment because he was just in the region, so he's fresh insight there. But the basic story is as you say, while we do everything here back home to try to protect ourselves from this scourge, we've got to try to interdict the chains of supply. And our forces in SouthCom especially, but also NORTHCOM, are a part of that. One of the reasons why I'm so committed to working with you up here on the Goldwater-Nichols revisit effort that the chairman and this committee have spearheaded, and I am doing also in the department and want to do with you, is because that is an area where your point, which is allocating resources among COCOMs in an agile, effective, and optimal way, that's where, from my point of view, I would like to strengthen the role of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chairman, because different COCOMs see different things in their regions. They're all deeply expert in their own regions, but somebody needs to put it all together and give me advice about that, how to synchronize all those forces. I look to the chairman and the joint staff for that. I'd like to get to for them to have more capability and authority to do so. I hope that's part of our effort. And with that, let me turn it over to the chairman, who just happened to be in the region last week.
Senator, I did, as the Secretary said, I spent last week on this issue. I visited Southern Command, visited our Joint Interagency Task Force, and then I went down to Columbia. And on the bright side, what I was encouraged by is the amount of information that we have, the amount of intelligence we have today far exceeds what we used to have. And if you look at the Joint Interagency Task Force alone, 15 different countries now sharing information intelligence. But what I found is that what we know far exceeds our ability to act on it from an interdiction perspective. So I saw exactly what you're alluding to, which was a shortfall of the resources necessary to interdict. And I came back with a much better appreciation of that. And frankly, what I've asked our team to do is to try to look, given all the challenges that we have and given all the competition for resources, I'm still not convinced that we can't find some innovative ways to address the interdiction. And at least if we took action on just the intelligence and the information that's currently available to the Joint Interagency Task Force. And the other thing, Senator, even in we have Joint Task Force Bravo. I think you're familiar with them. So while we've always had really a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the air and the sea, and increasingly better today, again because of both the interagency and the international cooperation. What I also found was our ability to see what's going on over land is also much greater than it was. And so what you're alluding to is I do think, and I came back with this, frankly, as something as a priority for me and the staff last week, coincidentally, was to come back and say, okay, we have all this information intelligence. I understand the competition for resources, but we have an imperative to actually do something about this. And frankly, I think you know it because you've looked at the issue. What I've seen the studies say is that about 40% of interdiction is kind of where you need to be. In other words, there's other things you have to do from prevention to treatment and so forth to deal with the issue. But if you get to 40% interdiction, that's kind of the contribution you can make at the interdiction level. We're probably half of that or below. And so my priority, and I'll come to the Secretary with some recommendations, is to try to get us as close to that 40% as we can. And again, if nothing else, to try to get us to the point where we're acting in interdicting based on the intelligence and information that we have today. So again, not a solution to the problem, but encouraged by what we know, now we've got to do something about it. And of course, it's not just a DOD issue. The Coast Guard plays a huge role in that, Department of Homeland Security and so forth.
Well, I appreciate hearing you say, General Dunford, you think it should be a priority based on your visit, because I remember also when General Kelly was commander of Southcom, he had talked to me at length about this, about that we had the information, we could see this stuff coming over, we just needed the additional resources to interdict it. And so I really appreciate your putting a focus on this, because we are, we need to do the work on the prevention and treatment. We're focusing on that, but the interdiction would be very significant because it's so cheap on our streets right now, and that will help drive up the cost. And also we know that these networks are used to traffic, used by terrorists and others too, so it's important for our homeland security as well.
Senator, if I could, one follow-up. The other thing that I came back with is, kind of an imperative to keep our partnership capacity building efforts in the region going and funding those adequately as well, because, clearly we can't do it all ourselves. We don't want to do it all ourselves. In the investment that we make in the ability of others to support the interdiction effort, I think is also an important part of this.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to associate myself with the questions and comments of Senator Sessions. I think the idea of developing a long-range strategy for dealing with the Middle East and violent jihadism is an important project. We can't just ad hoc it all the time, and this should be comprehensive. It should involve the Muslim world, the Arab countries, and other countries. So I commend the Senator for bringing that up. I'd like to go back to the budget and pull back a bit. We're facing a series of challenges. The one is a huge debt. now approaching $19 trillion that we're passing on to our children that I think is utterly irresponsible. The second is what I call the interest time bomb. Right now, we're in a never land of low interest rates. It's very unusual. If interest rates return to 5%, kind of average over many years, just interest on that national debt will be almost equal to the entire discretionary budget today, $950 billion, way more than the entire defense budget. Just the increase from 2% to 5% would almost equal the defense budget. That's money that's got to be paid, and that's an impending disaster out there. The third fact is that all of our discussions here today and in the other committees about the non-defense discretionary budget, the total of what we're talking about is a little over 20% of the total federal budget. 50% is mandatory expenditures, which is being driven largely by demographics, we're all getting older, and healthcare expenses. And then another 25 to almost 30% is tax expenditures, which are rarely discussed, but which now exceed the entire revenues of the discretionary budget, over $1 trillion a year. So we're trying to solve a huge problem, looking at only one piece of it. It's as if you had a big problem in your family budget and you said, we're going to solve this whole problem just by focusing on our electric bill. And that's where we are. And if you trend the lines out, we're already at the lowest point in 70 years in defense spending as a percentage of GDP. We're at the lowest point in 70 years as non-defense discretion. And we're struggling within this box that was created in 2011 to try to solve a problem that we can't solve within the space of that 21% of the overall federal budget. So it seems to me that you're doing a mighty job of working within the constraints. But if we don't go back and revisit the decisions of 2011, particularly in light of the reality of the world that we face today, we're facing a long-term catastrophe. I mean, you're a student of long-term federal budget. Is this an accurate assessment, Mr. Secretary?
It is, and I say it again this year. I said it when I presented the budget last year when I became Secretary of Defense. That's not something we can solve in defense, but we observe it.
But we're trying, we're being forced to try to. That's what bothers me.
You're exactly right. And we're trying to solve an entire problem on the back of discretionary spending. And it's not enough. And it's not sustainable. Now, all those other parts of the budget have to be in the picture. I understand that. I think that is what is necessary to have everybody come together behind a budget future. And one of the things that we're asking for here is stability and relief from those sequestration caps. I recognize.
Well, we've gotten to the point around here where 2 years sounds like stability. I mean, we're feeling great when we have a 2-year budget deal. Let me change the subject slightly. We've talked a lot about the bow wave and the modernization. We're talking about Ohio-class submarines, long-range strike bombers, missile upgrades. All of those are what I would call capital expenditures in the sense that they are 30, 40-year assets, and yet in this strange world of federal budgeting, they're treated as current expenditures. There's no way we're going to be able to handle those expenditures and do all the other things. Shouldn't we be thinking about them in a separate category? I believe there should be a capital federal budget, assuming for a moment we could figure out what it is we own, but we should have a capital budget for long-range investments like a 40-year Ohio-class submarine, as opposed to trying to fund them out of current operating expenses. Is that something you'd consider?
Well, certainly we try to think that way. As we put together budgets 1 year at a time, we prepare budgets 5 years at a time, as you know, even though you only consider budgets 1 year at a time. So we try to have that long-term perspective, and I opened my testimony by saying we did in this budget take the long view. That's an important new thrust in this budget, is to look ahead 10, 20, 30 years from now. Now, in order to do that, you have to be confident that the reasonable resources will be available then. To the specific point about the Ohio-class replacement and the strategic forces recapitalization, for example, I've already made the point that even with sequester relief, there's going to have to be additional
Right. It
funds
just doesn't
for
fit.
that purpose, because it's so large a bill
Right.
that we can't afford to have it squeeze out all of our other submarine construction or other shipbuilding. And so we have to take that long-term perspective. I agree with you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to continue along the same vein of questioning here. General Dunford, anytime your friends in the Navy come to testify about their top priorities, we get a little stoplight chart based on different budget scenarios. No matter the budget scenario, the sea-based nuclear deterrent is always green. Most other things might be yellow or red. Can you tell us why that is?
That reflects the priority of the department to provide an effective and safe nuclear deterrent, survivable nuclear deterrent, which is why that's green. It really does address the most important requirement that we have in the department, which is to prevent a nuclear war against the United States.
Do you know what percentage of the department's overall budget is spent on our nuclear deterrent, not just sea-based, but all legs of the triad, as well as the infrastructure?
Senator, I don't know the percentage that we spend on that.
Secretary Carter, you look like you know.
It is. It's about $20 billion a year. It depends on what you include in that, but it's a couple of tens of billions of dollars. It's not an enormous part of our budget, but it is a critical part of our budget. Because
that's a relatively small 4 or 5%.
It is. Now, that doesn't count the things that Senator King is talking about, the bills that will come in the future to keep it that way. But what we're paying in this year for our nuclear deterrent is that much.
I ask because of the sizable bills coming due to modernize all legs of the triad as well as the infrastructure. I sometimes hear people say, why do we spend so much money on weapons we never use? And my response would be, first, we don't spend that much money on them in the context of the defense budget. And second, we use our nuclear weapons every single day. There is a sea-based deterrence fund that was created last year, I believe, in anticipation of the large expense of the Ohio-class replacement submarine. Obviously, we also need to upgrade our bomber. That's why we have the B-21 program. And there are also land-based and infrastructure modernization that is needed. Rather than having merely a sea-based fund, should we perhaps have a nuclear deterrence fund?
I think that may make sense. Certainly for whatever we decide to do with respect to the ICBM force, both as regard missiles and their land basing. The B-21 bomber, also one could put in that category. I just want to emphasize, we want the B-21 bomber for the nuclear mission and non-nuclear mission. It'll be capable of both, and like our current bomber force, we'll use it for both.
Why would you have a sea-based deterrence fund alone and not a broader nuclear deterrence fund?
I'm agreeing with you that I think a broader nuclear deterrent fund may be
appropriate. Recognize that the B-21, like the B-2 and other aircraft, have dual capabilities, but the foundational capability across all of these systems is the nuclear deterrent. I'm not sure we should have any of these deterrent funds, but if we do decide that we want to treat our nuclear triad in a special kind of way, that I think we should probably do all three legs of the triad. Secretary Carter, I want to turn to the South China Sea. You said 2 weeks ago that China must not pursue militarization in the South China Sea. Specific actions will have specific consequences. What specific actions are you referring to?
The specific actions of China are actions to press territorial claims, not through international legal mechanisms and peaceful mechanisms, but through militarization. That's what the Chinese have been doing in the South China Sea. They're not the only ones, but they're by far and away the largest militarizers of features in that region. And the kinds of actions we're taking are, and I'll give you some examples of that we can go through more detail.
My next question would be, what are the specific consequences?
We can go through them more in another setting. But just to give you some examples, in addition to our own force posture in the region, which, as you know, we've been strengthening as part of the rebalance for several years, we're doing some extra strengthening of that this year. It's detailed in our budget statement, particularly has to do with increasing the lethality of our platforms out there and their technological capability. But in addition, One of the other effects that China's behavior is having is it is driving many of our partners and allies to want to do more with us, give us more access. We will have that in the Philippines. We're doing more with Vietnam, much more with Japan, Australia, India. And so not only are we reacting, but the countries in the region are reacting too. And our relationships with them accordingly are blossoming. We're doing much, much more.
Yes, obviously our relationships are getting much stronger in Northeast and Southeast Asia because of China's actions. But in the end, I think some kind of genuine action on our part is going to be necessary. Otherwise, they will present us with a fait accompli in the South China Sea. My time has expired. Thank you all. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Same to you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to Senator Manchin because he has to leave. So I will give my slot, and if you will come back to me after the next turn, I appreciate that.
Senator Sheen, thank you so much, and thank you all for your service, and thanks for being here. And let me just say, either to Secretary Carter, General Dunford, or whatever, I'm concerned about the Russia's recently announced withdrawal from the military forces from Syria, saying that they have fulfilled their mission. Putin communicating with President Obama on the Russian military force withdrawal and the next steps required to fully implement a ceasefire with the goal of advancing political negotiations on a resolution of the conflict in Syria. Then I just have on today, I see where the Syrian Kurds plan to declare a federal region in northern Syria territory. And I guess I would ask, do you anticipate a change in the U.S. military force role in Syria based on Russia's military withdrawal? And also, is Russia claiming success? And does it strengthen their basically their swagger, if you will, the political clout in that area?
Well, as I said before, Russia came in wrong-headedly because they said they were going to fight ISIL and they didn't. Instead, they supported Assad, which prolonged the civil war, fueled the civil war. So their effect has been the opposite of what they stated, and certainly the opposite of what is needed. It hasn't had an effect on our prosecution, to get to what we're doing in Syria, of our counter-ISIL campaign. It has had the effect, in my judgment, of prolonging the Syrian civil war. Now, maybe Russia can do what it should do, which is use its influence over the Assad regime to promote the transition. And that's what Geneva is about. And to get to the question about the Kurds, that's exactly the kind of thing that's being discussed in Geneva. But the Russian contribution has not been positive. And we're watching its withdrawal. I don't know how far that will go. But the Russian effect was not what they said it was going to be, and it was, as I've said, wrong-headed.
But I'm saying that still the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, establishing an area or claiming an area is not met with, it's being met with resistance from Assad and his regime, correct?
That is correct.
And you're thinking Russia can maybe negotiate that?
No, I don't know that Russia, we and others in the region, including the Turks, will have a major role in Geneva about deciding the manner of participation of the Kurds. So Russia will play a role in those talks, but we have an important role to play as well. And I will say, with respect to the Syrian Kurds, that they have proven to be excellent partners of ours on the ground in fighting ISIL. So we're grateful for that. We intend to continue to do that, recognizing the complexities of their role in the region overall.
General Dunford, your posture, the statement describes 5 strategic challenges: Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the violent extremists, of course, of ISIS. And I guess I would ask, in your assessment, the greatest threat we're facing from that lineup.
Senator, first, I guess I'd say we don't have the luxury of racking and stacking. We have to address each of them in their own way. What I've said in the past in testimony, I guess I would restate today, is the one that has the greatest capability and poses the greatest threat to the United States is Russia because of its capabilities, its nuclear capability, its cyber capability, and clearly because of some of the things we've seen in its leadership's behavior over the last couple of years.
And what do you make of the kidnapping of the young student in North Korea?
You know, I've watched that over the last couple of days, and you know, you can't help but feel for both him and the family. But I think it's just a reflection of the absolutely irresponsible leadership in North Korea, and it exposes the regime to those who may not have appreciated what the regime is. That behavior was certainly not a surprise to me in terms of North Korean regime behavior, and I think that probably many other people who maybe weren't as attentive to it have now seen what North Korea is all about.
Why do we have Americans still traveling in that area? I mean, why would they even be in the country?
Senator, that's clearly
that was a religious group, I believe, was it not? A religious.
It was a religious group, and what I heard this morning is that we've probably had some 15,000 people go over to North Korea as tourists over the last several years, and 13 of them have been apprehended. That was a statistic from the news, but this is clearly not something that the Department of Defense is involved with, and I can assure you that we don't have members of the Department of Defense visiting North Korea.
Secretary
Carter. The only thing I want to add, if I could, because it's timely in view of North Korea's threats about provocations, including missile launches, that we stand alert with our missile defense forces, with our allies, the Japanese and the South Koreans. That's a daily task. All sorts of missile defenses, as well as our deterrent forces on the DMZ and in South Korea. I use the phrase "fight tonight," and that's their slogan. And of course, nobody wants that to occur, but the way to make sure it doesn't occur is for us to be ready each and every night, and they're some of our most highly ready and capable forces.
Thank you all. My time is up.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Yesterday, I joined a bipartisan group of lawmakers to advocate for some incredible women who really do deserve to be honored. They are the Women Air Force Service Pilots, otherwise known as WASPs. And Secretary, you know where I'm going with this. It is a travesty that these women who are pioneers in military aviation had the honor of having their ashes interred at Arlington National Cemetery revoked last year, during the same year that historically you opened up positions that had been previously closed in combat to women. So I would like to see that addressed, and the Pentagon should do the right thing and honor these women by restoring their rights to have their ashes interred at the National Cemetery. And it's my understanding that a waiver can be done for these women to do so. So I would encourage you to do that. I'd like to see that action taken. They are part of America's greatest generation as well. So Secretary Carter and General Dunford, I will submit a record or a question for the record, and would love to have a forthcoming response from you on this issue. It is something that we are very passionate about, and making sure that women are honored as well. So first, Secretary Carter, I do continue to remain concerned about the lack of capacity and capability provided to EUCOM in order for it to perform its critical mission of defending our nation and our allies, and especially as we look at Russian aggression, and we've heard a number of members speak on that today. General Breedlove has come before our committee multiple times stressing the need to enhance our capacity and capability for EUCOM to match the threat of both Russian aggression and transnational terrorism. So specifically, one area which he raised, this is a top concern of his, and I do share it, it's the lack of support for force protection of our service members, of DoD civilians, and their family members. Considering terrorists have displayed the capability to plan, stage, and execute attacks in Western Europe and in recent bombings in Turkey, I would just urge you to take immediate action to increase our force protection capabilities in the EUCOM AOR. So with that, there is a request to quadruple funding for the European Reassurance Initiative in fiscal year 17, and specifically, Secretary and General Dunford, how will you build capacity and capability to enhance our force protection in that area and EUCOM's warfighting functions to better counter Russia's aggressions as well as transnational terrorism?
Thank you, Senator. First, I look forward to answering the question on the very
Thank
first
you. I appreciate it.
issue, and thank you for that. And secondly, both the issues you raised with respect to Europe are serious ones that we're adjusting to, and I'll say how. With respect to Russia and the potential for Russian aggression, outright aggression, or the kind of little green men hybrid warfare phenomenon that we saw, that's why we're quadrupling the European Reassurance Initiative. And to what it pays for the rotational presence of forces in Europe, including in border states that border Russia. It provides for increased prepositioning of heavy equipment there and also in Germany and elsewhere. It provides for doing more exercising and so forth with the Baltic states, with Poland, with Romania, and so forth, and for equipment sets there that our troops fall in on. So the European Reassurance Initiative, which this year, you're right, we're asking $3.4 billion. It's in our budget. It's extremely important. Basically, we're adjusting to a fact that we haven't had to face for a quarter century, as I said in my statement, namely that we have a Russia that is threatening to Western Europe, and we need a new playbook that goes with that. I regret to say that, but there it is. That's what the European Reassurance Initiative is about. Now, separately, you're right, and this is something that General Breedlove and I and General Dunford watch very closely, is the protection of our people. That's a paramount concern to us everywhere, is force protection. Everywhere overseas, but Europe also. And so we watch that very carefully, and we're taking steps to work with our host countries to increase the protection. We're taking steps ourselves with our own people, procedural and technical steps. We can go into them with you in another setting, but it's extremely important. Our people are protecting us. We owe them protection as well. Let me ask the chairman if he wants to add anything on either of those.
The only thing, the exercises, Senator, I mean, it's not only the capabilities we bring, and of course, it's posturing of forces with prepositioned forces for responsiveness. It's the exercises to assure our allies and partners on a day-to-day basis. But a number of those exercises are also designed to build the capacity of our European partners, too, so that collectively the 28 nations of NATO can be prepared to deal with the Russian threat. And I would say that if we fully leverage the political, the economic, and the military capabilities of the 28 nations in NATO, it wouldn't be a fair fight, which is exactly what we wouldn't want it to be.
Exactly. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of the chairman, let me recognize Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony today and for your service. I want to follow up on Senator's questions about the European Reassurance Initiative, because as I'm sure you're both aware, Europe is probably facing more challenges today than it has at any time since the end of World War II. And the European Reassurance Initiative is very important in letting them know how committed we are to the peace and security of Europe. And I was pleased to see that the President's budget increased funding for the ERI. Can you talk a little bit more about what the risks are if we don't support additional funding for the Reassurance Initiative? And also tell me if you share General Breedlove's view that, I don't think I'm misquoting him, but when he was before this committee, he talked about the need to put more of our troops in Europe.
Well, the effect of not funding the European Reassurance Initiative would be physically that we wouldn't have the funds to put equipment, position equipment there. That's equipment that then forces could fall into in a crisis. to reinforce the forces. It's always been our strategy in Europe, and it would be now, that we would have forces there already, but we would fall in with a much greater force. In fact, the full weight, the full might of the U.S. military behind NATO in the event of a crisis. But we need the equipment there, and we need our forces to be familiar with the terrain, which is why rotational training is so important. We need them to know how to work with their allies. We need them to be able to do all the logistics that allow a force to flow quickly. That's the kind of thing that General Breedlove needs to be able to exercise and prepare for. That's our approach, and we need the money in the ERI. That's physically what it does.
And
politically, it's also important, because
Yes.
the reassurance is important. The allies want to know that we're there with them and that we see what they see in the behavior of Russia. And we do, and we want to match our behavior to theirs. And their concern is growing as well. We're asking them to do more at the same time we're doing more.
I had a chance to visit some of the NATO exercises last summer in Latvia, and it was very impressive. And you could see that the synergy that existed, because there were a number of countries coming together to work together and to work out the bugs of any future challenges we might face. Let me switch topics here to the issue of energy. I had the opportunity at the readiness hearing this week to talk to ask all of the vice chiefs of each of the branches about the move towards more energy efficiency and alternative sources of energy within our military, and the perception that some people have that this is being done because people are being forced to do it, as opposed to because there's part of our military imperative to improve our strategic readiness, that we have other energy sources that we can count on, so that we're not so dependent on fossil fuels as we have been in the past. Can I ask you all, if you can speak to that, why you think this is an important strategic move as we look at our national security?
Well, it is important to our overall national security. Energy security is, and we play a part in that. But everything we do needs to make sense for defense, as well as play a part in the overall national energy strategy. But so things we do to increase the energy efficiency of engines, develop new engines, very important for our air forces, but also will have a consequence for a good consequence for the economy generally. We spend money in order to save money on facilities, making them more energy efficient. We have a large existing base of buildings, installations, and so forth. We work on making them more energy efficient. We do that for the very reason that it frees up more money in the future that we can invest in real military capabilities. Everything we do in the energy sphere has to make sense as a military investment. At the same time, these things are beneficial for the nation's overall energy strategy. And we do try to align them with the Department of Energy and the overall strategy, so that we're not doing something that somebody else is already doing, and that we're benefiting from what other people are doing, and they're benefiting from what we're doing. But it has to make military sense for us.
General Dunford, could you speak to the readiness benefit of our being able to take advantage of some of these new technologies?
Senator, I could. From my perspective, there's a couple of things about this. One is, if you save money in base operating expenses, that money's available for something else, readiness. And then there's also an operational flexibility aspect of this as well. The less reliant you are on fuel, the more operationally flexible you are. And that is not only at the level of aircraft and ships and some of the bigger programs that we talk about a lot. But it's also, if you just look at the load of an individual infantryman in batteries, as an example. So some of the initiatives we've had to lighten the load, if you look at the weight that our young men and women are carrying right now, it's prohibitive. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to reduce the load of the individual soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is simply by renewable energy sources that reduces the weight that they carry in batteries alone, which is one of the biggest things that an infantryman has to carry. So, again, I think from a readiness perspective, you save money with fuel. You're able to reinvest that money. And then from an operational flexibility perspective, again, both at the platform level and the individual service member level, there's a lot of utility to that. But as the Secretary says, it's got to make sense.
Sure. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Green, please.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. The Freedom Caucus, I think, in the House, do you want to go? Okay. The Freedom Caucus in the House, I think, has taken a position that the House budget should go back to sequestration levels for this year. General Dunford, what would your response to that position be?
My immediate response, Senator, would be we will have to revise the defense strategy if we go back to sequestration. We will not be able to do what we need to do right now. And when I say revise the strategy, it's important to emphasize we'll have to revise the ends of our strategy because we will not be able to protect our interests in the same way that's articulated right now in our national security strategy and our defense strategy.
What effect would that have on our national security?
It would cause us to expose the nation to risk from those 5 challenges that the Secretary and I have spoken about
Would
today.
you say significant risk?
I would say significant risk.
It actually put our freedom at risk.
It would absolutely affect that.
Okay. I sent you a letter, and you've given me a very timely response, and I appreciate it, General Dunford, about some have suggested that we intentionally target civilians in the war on terror and that we go back to using waterboarding or maybe even more aggressive interrogation techniques. And you've given me a good response, which I'll share with the public later. But I forgot to ask one question. What effect, if any, would this have on the warfighter if we started telling our men and women in uniform to intentionally target civilian non-combatants and engage in techniques such as waterboarding or more extreme forms of interrogation?
Well, Senator, what I've said publicly before is that, our men and women, and we ought to be proud of it, when they go to war with the values of our nation. And those kind of activities that you've described, they're inconsistent with the values of our nation. And quite frankly, I think it would have an adverse effect, as many adverse effects would have. One of would be on the morale of the force.
Yeah.
And frankly, what you're suggesting are things that actually aren't legal for them to do anyway.
Well, I don't think I've ever met a tougher guy than you, and I think it would hurt your morale if you were ordered to kill innocent non-combatants. So, Raqqa. Do you see Raqqa falling this year, taken away from ISIL?
Senator, we're focused right now on isolating Raqqa, limiting the enemy's freedom of movement. I can't put a timeline on when Raqqa will fall. I can tell you that we're working very closely with indigenous forces on the ground to isolate and then subsequently...
Do you agree with me the likelihood of Raqqa falling between now and the election is pretty remote?
Senator, again, I haven't put a timeline on it.
When it came to liberating Fallujah, how many U.S. soldiers or military personnel involved?
Senator, we had 14,000 U.S. personnel that were involved immediately in the operations around Fallujah, but obviously many more in the surrounds that had a isolation effect.
If they haven't been there, would the outcome have been different? If we were not using American military personnel to deal with Fallujah?
Well, at that time, Senator, we did not have capable indigenous forces. There was not an alternative to U.S. forces in Fallujah.
Compare the indigenous forces in Syria today with the indigenous forces that existed at the Battle of Fallujah. Are they more capable in Syria than they were in Iraq?
Today, I would assess the Syrian Democratic Forces, based on their performance at Shadadi and other recent operations, are more capable relative to the threat that exists in Syria than what we had in Iraq back in 2004.
Are they more capable of taking Raqqa than the Iraqis were of taking Fallujah?
In 2004 and 2005, I would assess yes.
Okay. How many Arabs are in the Syrian Democratic Forces?
Right now, we have about 10 to 15,000 Syrian Democratic Forces, of which 5,000 are Arabs, and there's an estimated 20 to 30,000 additional reserve Syrian Democratic Forces.
Is it your testimony that the people we're training inside of Syria are capable of taking Raqqa back from ISIL and holding it?
At this time, Senator, no, but we intend on growing their capabilities over time, and I would qualify that by saying that they're also going to require some support from the coalition.
Okay. Iran, post-agreement, is Iran becoming a better actor in the region, or their behavior gotten worse post-nuclear agreement?
Senator, Iran was a malign influence in the region prior to the agreement. Iran remains a malign influence today.
Do you think Mosul will be in the hands of ISIL by the end of this year?
Senator, I don't have, similar to Raqqa, I wouldn't put a timeline on when we would secure Mosul, but again, I would emphasize that operations against Mosul are ongoing.
Is taking Mosul going to be more difficult than what we had to do in Fallujah in 2004 and 5?
Significantly more difficult based on the population and the size of the enemy.
So if you take Mosul without 14,000 American military members, does that make it even more significantly different?
Senator, it really is a correlation of forces issue, and right now we've identified over 12 brigades of Iraqi security forces, additional Peshmerga forces, and we're in the process of generating effective Sunni forces. So the idea is that we'll isolate Mosul until the conditions are set for those forces to be successful in securing Mosul.
Finally, between 2016 and 2021, the next 5-year window, we've talked about what's happened since 2011 to now. Generally speaking, do our national security threats, do they maintain at this level, go up or go down? What can America expect in the next 5 years in terms of threats, and what kind of budget should we have?
Yeah, I think I would assess, based on the trajectory we see today, I don't see our security challenges decreasing over the next 5 years, Senator, for sure.
Agree with that, Mr. Secretary?
I do.
Thank you.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Nelson.
Mr. Secretary, would you give us your advice for that period of time, 2018 to 2022, of being able to put our payloads into space? And I'm mainly talking about DOD and Intel payloads, in addition to NASA payloads and commercial payloads. Would you give us your advice on the question of whether or not we should continue to be able to have access to the RD-180 engine, which is the engine in the first stage of the Atlas V rocket, until we develop the new one?
I can, Senator, and it is reflected in our budget, and I know that there are different points of view on how to approach this problem. I think everybody agrees we have to have assured access to space, so we have to have a way to launch our national security payloads into space. Our country's security depends on that. One way to do that, which is reflected in our budget, is to continue to use the Atlas booster, including a limited but continuing number of RD-180 engines, notwithstanding the fact that we don't like the fact that they're made in Russia and we buy them from Russia. That's the approach we recommend because it is less expensive. The alternative, which I understand, but we don't recommend in this budget because it costs more, would be essentially to use the Delta as a replacement, which is more expensive than is required. If we're forced to do that, it ends up giving us a bill of $1 billion, maybe more, which is not a bill we would like to pay. So it's that simple. We'll get to space. We have to, because our security depends upon it. We are recommending to you a less expensive way, but which does, however, cause us to have to hold our nose insofar as the procurement of the RD-180 engine is concerned, and I recognize that there's a difference of opinion there, but that's my advice.
Can, in your opinion and what you've been advised, can they ramp up the production of enough of the Delta IVs to get all of your payloads into space, even though it's going to cost more?
My understanding is that, yes, that alternative is available, technically available. Obviously, it's much more expensive, which is the reason for the not recommending it.
And it's more expensive also because the RD-180 has to be used on the Atlas V for a number of the NASA payloads, including the Americans on the new Boeing Starliner, which is the spacecraft that will take us to and from the International Space Station, along with what we expect, the Falcon 9 and its spacecraft Dragon, but also all of the commercial payloads. So if you shut down part of that production until we get the new replacement engine and new replacement rocket, because you just can't take a new engine and plug it into the Atlas V, it's going to cost everybody more, including the commercial sector.
I can't speak for NASA or for them, but you're right. The Delta route is more expensive than the Atlas route. It is available, and we've made our recommendation. Where we'd like to go in the future and where we're headed in the future is a competitive provision of launch service. That's really important for both cost and quality reasons, and to have two or more competitors from whom we buy launch services. I don't buy the pieces of the rocket or develop them. They do that, and they provide us launch services. That's an efficient and competitive way. That's the route we're going to. But I realize that there is a difference of opinion about how we get to that destination. We've made our recommendation in our budget submission.
And fortunately, that competition has started because the Falcon 9 SpaceX has been a very viable competitor. And in fact, that competition has brought the cost of the Atlas V down. And so there's a good example of competition that, in fact, is working. Let me just conclude by any comment on our aging nuclear triad and the need for the long-range strike capability.
Yes, just to reinforce that the nuclear deterrent of this country it's not in the headlines every day, thank goodness, but it's not in the headlines because it's there. It's the bedrock it's a bedrock capability of our security. We need it for the indefinite future. We intend to have it for the indefinite future, and we're going to need to spend the money required to have that. Of particular concern, I would single out the Ohio-class replacement submarine, just take one example, but a big example, because the Trident submarines are going to age out. They're effective, but old submarines. They'll be replaced by the Ohio-class replacement. That's a key survivable part of our nuclear deterrent. We have to have it. You mentioned the bombers. That's one of the reasons why we're seeking to start and have started the long-range strike bomber or B-21 bomber program. And so making sure that we have a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear deterrent for the future is a bedrock responsibility of the department. We'll need the funding to do that. We have plans to do that.
On behalf of the chairman, Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service and your testimony here today. I particularly appreciate both of you outlining the 5 strategic threats. I think that's very clear. I think the American people need to hear that. I think Senator Graham's comments about, or his question about how you think those are going to continue is also very important testimony. You know, those threats and how to counter them include the aggression of Russia, which, as you know, Mr. Secretary General Dunford, is not only Europe but in the Arctic. the ability to fight tonight with regard to North Korea, as you mentioned, the ability to continually rebalance our Asia-Pacific force posture in light of our challenges there with China. And in light of those serious threats, you may have seen that General Milley recently decided to reverse the Army's earlier decision made last year to disband the 425, which, as you know, Mr. Secretary, is the only airborne BCT in the entire Asia-Pacific, the strategic reserve that would be very involved in any kind of conflict in Korea, the only Arctic BCT that's trained to fight in mountains in extreme cold weather. And I've raised this issue a number of times in the committee over the last year. Recently, several combatant commanders mentioned that they were supportive specifically of what General Milley is trying to do, just given how critical these forces are. So, Mr. Secretary, do you support the Army's recommendation to more effectively posture its forces to best meet the national security threats that you outlined in your testimony, particularly as it relates to the 425 and what General Milley mentioned, I think, a couple weeks ago?
Well, Senator, thank you very much for your interest in this. And I had the opportunity, which I appreciate, the other day to discuss this with you.
Yes, sir.
And thank you for your leadership with respect to the overall rebalance, and also for your state's hosting of forces that are so critical to so many scenarios of possible risk to the United States, as you already said. And with respect to 425, I looked into that after our conversation. I've spoken to General Milley. If he makes that recommendation to me, I want you to know I'm going to approve that.
Thank you.
And I think that is an important part of our force posture in the Pacific, and I appreciate your calling my attention to it.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. Let me get back to the rebalance issue that you mentioned. You know, a lot of us met with you last year in Shangri-La. I think it was, you and I have talked about at the defense ministers' meeting out there, an important demonstration of U.S. legislative, executive, bipartisan support for that important strategy. And I think a number of us are planning on going again, so I think doing that again would be important to show a strong, across-the-board American resolve.
Thank you.
With regard to the implementation of the strategy that you laid out in your speech last year, which I thought was a very strong speech, you know, we've been asking, a number of us have written the President, have been encouraging, make sure we implement this policy on a routine basis. Now I'm talking about the South China Sea and our FONOPs there, not only on a routine basis but also with allies. But I'd like you to comment on, in both of you and General Dunford, on the opportunities that what's going on out there presents to the United States from a strategic perspective. And more specifically, as you know, Mr. Secretary, and you see it every time you go out into the region, many, many countries, because of what China is actually doing in the South China Sea, many countries are very much being more interested in working with us and drawing closer to the United States. Are there strategic opportunities that we should be looking at in terms of possible new basing, new training opportunities with the Marines in the Asia-Pacific, clarifying strategic relationships? I think there's a number of questions of what our strategic obligations are with regard to, say, a country like the Philippines. Looking at the next challenges, I know that there's some concern on this committee about the Scarborough Shoal, but what are the opportunities that we have? Because they seem to me, yeah, we have challenges there, but there's also, I think, enormous strategic opportunities. Could you and General Dunford talk to those, particularly, you know, the idea of new basing arrangements, the idea of new training arrangements? I think that there's a lot we could be doing. I'd like to hear both of your views on that.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I'll start and then ask the Chairman to chime in as well. There are opportunities. They're presenting themselves because countries in the region recognize that their region has had peace and stability for 70 years. And that is what has given them all the opportunity to rise. All the Asian miracles, beginning with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, today India, and yes, China. All of that has occurred in an atmosphere of peace and stability, which they know we have played a pivotal part in. And so there is a greater demand for partnership with us. Whether you talk about basing, we are discussing with the Philippines right now, and you may know that their court passed an important milestone recently, which will allow us to do much more with the Philippines. We're doing more, and General Dunford had a key role in this with Australia, particularly our Marine rotations in Australia. Vietnam, who'd have thought decades ago, Vietnam, we're doing more with Vietnam. We thank you because we have the Maritime Security Initiative funding, which originated in discussions with you, Senator, and other members of the committee. We're grateful for that. We're using that funding. And the Japanese, as you probably know, have adjusted and amended their practices. They're looking to do more with us, joint patrolling, exercising, and so forth. India, I'll be in India in a short while, continuing to strengthen our relationship with that incredibly important country of 1 billion people and an essential geography and a very capable military that wants to partner with us as well. So we do all this in order to keep going the system that has brought prosperity to Asia. We're not seeking a conflict with China. It's not against anybody. It's part of keeping that system of security intact, and we intend to do it. That's what the rebalance is about. But the good news, as you say, is that we're popular there. People want to work with us. Let me turn it over to the chairman.
Senator, I guess I'd emphasize what you and the Secretary have alluded to. I've made 2 trips to the region since I've been in my current assignment. And I would tell you that the desire for people to develop stronger bilateral relationships with the United States has probably never been greater. And frankly, with our partners, particularly those with whom we have a treaty obligation, our relationship has probably never been deeper. But when you talk about opportunities, the one thing that we haven't necessarily had in the past are multilateral relationships and interoperability associated with conducting everything from humanitarian assistance operations to other operations that may be required in the region, or that multilateralism in and of itself serving as a deterrent to those who might want to be destabilizing in the region. So there's an opportunity. And from those relationships, then comes the one issue we haven't talked about in great detail is opportunities for training. Because in the Pacific, joint training is required to maintain readiness, and we're always looking for opportunities to identify training areas where we can maintain readiness even as we conduct the exercises and engagements with our partners. And I think the willingness of our partners to afford us the opportunity to train in their countries, continue to maintain proficiency with live fire, aviation capabilities, those kinds of things, I think will only increase in the future. And there's a number of places where we're in contact. Secretary's staff is in contact with a number of countries to enhance our training opportunities, and as the Secretary spoke about, our actual basing opportunities in the region. So I would agree with you. I think a view of the common challenges in the Pacific has brought us together in a very positive way and has created all the opportunities you've alluded to.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Lee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here. Secretary Carter, on December 3rd, just a few months ago, you announced that the military branches would be opening all military occupational specialties, or MOSs, to service members regardless of gender, on the basis of various provisions in several iterations of the National Defense Authorization Act, and on the basis of committee hearings and formal briefings with members and staff. At the time of your decision, you were certainly aware of Congress's interest in being closely consulted on the matter. Nevertheless, in your announcement and in subsequent briefings with members of Congress, you failed to discuss the legal and practical implications this decision could have on the selective service in America. So my concern is that it seems the Department may have made a policy decision and left up to Congress and the courts to deal with the difficult legal ramifications. So I'd like to know what assessments, Mr. Secretary, has the Department of Defense made to examine how opening all MOSs to female service members will affect the Selective Service Act? And what assessments have you made to examine how requiring American women to register for the draft or alternatively ending the Selective Service altogether would affect military readiness, recruitment, retention, and morale?
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you for that question. Let me just begin at the beginning. Why did we do this in the first place? The reason to open up all MOSs to females is to make sure that we're able to access what is, after all, 50% of the population.
Right. And understand, I'm not expressing concern about that decision on the merits of that one. I'm talking about its implications for the Selective Service.
I do understand. So that is the action we took, and as far as informing the Congress is concerned, we have the implementation plans for that, including everything that is required by law in order for us to do what we need to do. Separately is the Selective Service system, which is not administered by us and is governed by statute. So you will have a voice in any implications for that. My own belief about that is twofold. First, it stands to reason that you'll reconsider the Selective Service system and its treatment of females in view of the Department of Defense's policies and practices with respect to women as well as men. But the second thing I'd like to say about the Selective Service system and the draft generally is this: we want to pick our people. We don't want people forced to serve us, and we don't want all the people that are young people that are in our country. We pick very carefully. In fact, only about a little bit more than 2/3 of young Americans even meet our basic qualifications. Many of them are, I'm sad to say, obese or have other health issues. 1/3 of them haven't graduated from high school, and we want high school graduates. About 10% of them have criminal records, and that make it impossible for us to want them. So we don't want a draft. We don't want people chosen for us. We want to pick people. That's what the all-volunteer force is about. That's why the all-volunteer force is so excellent, and that's why we're constantly trying to make sure we keep up with labor markets and generational trends and so forth, so that we continue to pick and have access to the very best people. Look at the magnificent people we have now in uniform. I need to make sure that tomorrow and 10 years from now and 20 years from now, we're also able to attract the very best. But now and then, we want to pick. We don't want to have people picked for us. We want to pick ourselves.
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the sentiment that I think I understand you expressing, which is that any change to the universe of persons subject to the Selective Service registration requirement needs to be made by Congress with input from the American people rather than administratively or by the courts.
It's set in law.
In a long-ranging interview published with The Atlantic, President Obama has expressed his disdain for security free riders when it comes to allies in Europe and parts of the Middle East. However, your FY17 budget calls for a quadrupling of the European Reassurance Initiative and robust OCO funding for our activities in the Middle East. So how do you and how does the administration, how does President Obama reconcile concerns that President Obama has expressed about some of our allies who are not taking steps to increase their defense spending, or who are potentially abusing their relationship with us, their alliance with us for their own benefit without making corresponding increases to their investment in defense spending?
Well, I'll just say, as Secretary of Defense, I think America needs to lead, and I'm happy to have us lead. And we have by far and away more capability than anybody else. But we need others to join us and get in the game. You mentioned Europe. We have been urging very insistently Europeans to spend more on their own defense. Some are doing what they're supposed to do. I, for example, commend the United Kingdom, which has recently increased its percentage of GDP and has agreed to stay at what all the NATO countries agreed, which is a minimum of 2%. And they're not all there yet. And then as you go around the world with respect to others, allies in the Gulf and so forth, we are looking for people to join us. There, the Counter-ISIL Coalition, the effort to deter Iranian aggression, that's something we need our security partners to do with us. So we're prepared to lead, we're willing to lead, but I think it's fair to turn to our partners and say, we need you to join us. Now, my role in that is very specifically, and the chairman's as well, to describe for our, let's take the Counter-ISIL Coalition, what it is we need. So here's what we need. We need some more ISR help from you. We need some special forces from you. We need, and this is important, reconstruction funding for places like Ramadi. So if you don't have any forces, or you don't want to put your forces there, you could open your wallet. That's needed. And so we try to give them choices for how they can make a contribution and lead them in that direction. But we need people to follow. It's an important part of my job, and I know the chairman does this well, to talk to our counterparts and say, we need everybody in the game if we're going to have a peaceful world. We share this world together. We share this future together. You got to get in the game. Let me ask the chairman if he wants to.
No, I just emphasize what the Secretary said. I think a key part of our responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, and I recently went to the region and met with 30 of the chiefs of defense from our coalition partners to encourage their participation. But one of the things we do very hard is work on where they can make a contribution and encourage them to actually do that. I mean, that's an ongoing process. Are we satisfied with where we are? Never.
Thank you, General Dunford, and thank you, Secretary Carter.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service. And on behalf of Chairman McCain, let me declare the hearing adjourned.
Thank you.